Chapter 399. Li Daochong nodded and didn't explain. Li Daochong didn't know any ancient medical skills. In fact, he relied on the pure spiritual energy transformed by the blood upgrader. This spiritual energy could restore all vitality that needed to be restored and devour all yin, death, nether, and ghost chi. Li Daochong took out the little monkey in the cage and placed his hand on the monkey's head. He poured a stream of spiritual energy into it and quickly found the cause of the little monkey's illness. Wei Beitong stared at Li Daochong with his old eyes, hoping to find clues and see the characteristics and techniques of the technique used. However, Wei Beitong looked for a long time and came to the conclusion that Li Daochong didn't use any techniques at all. This little monkey had 2 major injuries on its body and a kind of debilitating disease. There was a very faint yin energy in its heart. It was this energy that sucked away the vitality of the little monkey, making it look sick. The injuries on the little monkey's body were caused by someone, and they hadn't been injured for more than a day. The illness was also caused by someone. Obviously, this little monkey was brought over by Wei Beitong to test Li Daochong. Li Daochong didn't mind showing off in front of Wei Beitong. He also wanted to see what his real purpose was. If Wei Beitong didn't have any evil intentions, it wouldn't be a bad thing to befriend him. Li Daochong knew that he was still too ruthless when he wiped out the Blood Knife Society this time. He almost wiped out the entire Blood Knife Society's strongest forces. The Blood Knife Society had been operating for so many years. Li Daochong didn't believe that it didn't have a few powerful allies. It was unknown if there were any complicated relationships among them. If there were some powerful people who came to make trouble for Li Daochong, it would be troublesome. Li Daochong wasn't afraid if he was alone. At worst, he could go directly to the front line and come out when he was promoted to yuanying. However, there was the Li family. There was Yin Ping, his father Li Qingyao, and a group of friends. If they were implicated, Li Daochong wouldn't be able to take care of them. Putting these aside, it was also a problem whether the Federation would pursue the matter. After all, the Blood Knife Society was somewhat special. In addition to being a force to fight against the Hades, it was also established by the demon race. The demon race was a minority in the Federation. Over the years, the Federation attached great importance to the protection of the minority. However, Li Daochong still had a trump card in his hand. If the Federation really wanted to pursue the matter, he could only use this trump card. Taoist spirit, Taoist, he would help him. The promise of a nascent soul stage cultivator was naturally worth 1,000 gold and was extremely precious. Li Daochong didn't want to use it casually. If the Federation really wanted to pursue the matter, Li Daochong could only seek perfected spirit talisman's help. However, if they could form a good relationship with Wei Beitong, with the Wei clan's strength, they should be able to resolve this matter. A few minutes later, the eyes of the little monkey, who was on the verge of death, lit up and the long fur on its body became crystal clear. When Li Daochong released his hand, the little monkey jumped on the table for a while, waving its arms and legs at Li Daochong as if to thank him. Finally, it climbed onto Li Daochong's shoulder and sat down, looking like it wasn't going to leave. Discovered an immature shabi. It's a spirit beast that eats ghosts. It has a natural restraining effect on dark ghosts and a strong immunity to ghost technique. It can ward off evil and suppress ghosts. When the little monkey sat on Li Daochong's shoulder, the blood-boiling level-up device in his sea of consciousness suddenly issued a notification. Under normal circumstances, the blood-boiling level-up device would only have an intense reaction when it was close to dark ghosts. Apart from dark ghosts, Li Daochong had to touch or consciously activate the blood-boiling level-up device before it would react. Otherwise, it wouldn't make a sound. Today it was quite active. Shabi? Li Daochong glanced at the little monkey on his shoulder. It didn't look like one. Wasn't a shabi a flying demonic ape? This little monkey had no wings, no fangs, and a short tail. At first glance, it was obvious that it was an ordinary mountain monkey. Its fur was waxy yellow like withered grass without any luster. Li Daochong had injected so much spirit qi into the little monkey just now, but it only made the little monkey's fur shine for a while before quickly returning to its original appearance. It was dirty and not likable at all. In short, this little monkey didn't have any characteristics of a shabi, nor did it have the beast core unique to powerful spirit beasts. An old monster like Wei Beitong clearly couldn't tell, or he wouldn't have experimented on a shabi. The shabi was one of the 10 ancient divine beasts. If it could be raised in captivity, it could become a powerful combat partner in the future. Also, shabi were relatively close to people. Once it recognized a master, it would remain loyal until death. Although Li Daochong couldn't tell which part of the little monkey looked like a shabi and suspected that this mixed fur monkey was a shabi, no matter how doubtful he was, his trust in the hot-blooded level-up device still prevailed. Li Daochong naturally didn't show what he was thinking on his face. His expression was normal, and he just let the little monkey sit on his shoulder. It was quite the demeanor of a Taoist. Wei Beitong stared at the little monkey and scanned it with his telekinesis. This mixed fur mountain monkey, which should have died in a few days, was completely healed after Li Daochong used his qi to heal it. Its internal problems were also gone. Wei Beitong was surprised by the speed of the treatment. He could also heal the little monkey, but it would take a certain amount of time. He had to refine a spirit medicine first, and then unblock the little monkey's meridians. However, Li Daochong only needed to use his spirit qi to heal it, and the treatment was completed in a few minutes. Ancient medical skills were indeed magical. Wei Beitong couldn't hide the excitement on his face. The method of using qi could not only be used for treatment, but also for refining medicine. One could use qi to make medicine. In advance, one would inject the principles of qi into the spirit medicine and then seal it. After consuming the spirit medicine, the qi would automatically release and heal the body. Or one could use it on spirit talismans and control the spirit talismans to attack wherever it was directed. It could also be used on spirit arrays, dharma treasures, weapons, and even the flying space shuttle. Mr. Li's qi treatment is really amazing, Wei Beitong said in amazement. At this moment, he no longer had the arrogance of a noble alchemist. He wanted nothing more than to worship Li Daochong as his master. If it weren't for Wei Ziying standing beside him, Wei Beitong really would have done so. Could it be that Li Daochong had discovered some ancient ruins? Otherwise, how could he have such amazing abilities? Qi treatment, amazing cultivation speed, powerful strength, and even know how to make strengthening spirit talismans. For a moment, Wei Beitong had a trace of evil thoughts, but he quickly discarded them. Wei Beitong didn't believe that Li Daochong didn't have any trump cards. Although he was a Yuanian cultivator, Li Daochong already had the power of a peak Jin Dan cultivator and couldn't be underestimated. If he failed, he would provoke a powerful enemy. According to Li Daochong's current growth speed, he estimated that if he failed, he would have to face a powerful enemy. In 2 or 3 years, he would reach the level of Yuanian cultivator, but his power would increase even more. By then, even the Wei family wouldn't be able to withstand Li Daochong's wrath. The reason why Wei Beitong was able to live for so long was not only because of his alchemy skills, but also because he was able to suppress his greed. This was the main reason why Wei Beitong was able to live for so long. It's just a small trick, Elder Wei. Now that I've shown you the qi treatment, can you tell me why you're here? Li Daochong asked. Ha, of course. I've always been interested in Mr. Li's qi treatment. Also, I want to thank Mr. Li for saving Ziying, Wei Beitong said with a slightly embarrassed smile. You don't have to be so polite, Elder Wei. I paid you back then, so we don't owe each other anything. As for the qi treatment, if Elder Wei is interested, you can exchange it with something valuable, Li Daochong said slowly. Elder Wei's eyes lit up. At first, He thought that Li Daochong would refuse without hesitation. After all, this was an ancient secret technique. He didn't expect that he could exchange it. As long as he could exchange it, it would be easy. Wei Beitong was so poor that all he had was money. As an alchemist who had lived for so long, he had a lot of collections. Wei Beitong chuckled. "Mr. Li, just tell me what you want. As long as it's something I can give, I won't be stingy." Li Daochong was not pretentious. He said directly, "The qi treatment isn't something that can be learned in a day or two. Also, I need to personally channel my qi into your body so that you can feel it. Every time I do it, I'll have to exchange 10 items." Wei Beitong could feel it directly when he heard it. Wouldn't that mean that he could learn it very quickly? He could even exchange 100 items, let alone 10. Wouldn't he be able to learn it after experiencing it once or twice? "I'm a Yuanian cultivator and an alchemist. My perception is more than 1,000 times better than that of ordinary people. This is a good deal." Wei Beitong immediately said, "If Mr. Li is willing to do this, just tell me what you want. Although the Wei family isn't considered a top family in the Federation, no family dares to compete with us in terms of wealth. 10,000-year frost soul, 1,000-year fiery sun grass, mysterious nether jade, 9 strange gold root, etc. Whatever you want, just tell me." Li Daochong smiled. "Elder Wei, I don't want any of these. They're useless to me. I want yin-yang tears, Xidagarba flower, true dragon horn rong, 1,000-year divine beast blood, demon soul grass." Every time Li Daochong listed an item, a drop of sweat would appear on Wei Beitong's face. By the end of the list, the back of his head was soaked with sweat. "Motherf ******. Wei Beitong screamed in his heart. Although these items weren't the most valuable things and weren't as valuable as the items Wei Beitong had just listed, they were extremely difficult to obtain. Wei Beitong's 500 years of hard work had been accumulated in the Wei family's treasure vault. Out of the 10 items Li Daochong had listed, there were only 4. The main thing was that Wei Beitong usually didn't pay attention to these things. Otherwise, there wouldn't be only 4. Ahem. Wei Beitong had just bragged and was now a little embarrassed. He coughed a few times and said, Mr. Li, these things are very rare. To be honest, I only have 4 of them. But don't worry, I'll only need half a month to get all the other 6. Li Daochong nodded. Then in half a month, I'll go to the Wei family to get the items and then teach Elder Wei the qi circulation technique. How about that? Wei Beitong immediately nodded. Of course. It's the Wei family's honor to be able to come. Seeing her grandfather praise Li Daochong so highly, as if implying that the Wei family couldn't compare to him, Wei Ziying, who was standing on the side, became more and more confused. Although the estrangement between her and Li Daochong in the past had been resolved during the 100 schools joint examination, their relationship had improved. Wei Ziying also admired Li Daochong's talent, but she only saw him as a good friend. Her good friend was suddenly treated as an equal by her grandfather and was even elevated to an unimaginable position. Wei Ziying couldn't accept this. Even if Li Daochong had entered the Jin Dan realm at a young age, he shouldn't be valued so highly. At most, he would be treated as a guest of the Wei family. Chapter 400. Elder Wei, I think this mountain monkey is quite well behaved. It must be fate for us to meet each other in this way. Why don't you let it stay by my side? Li Daochong said calmly. Since Mr. likes it, then keep it. This mountain monkey was something I took from the cage in the Shadow Serene workshop. If not for that, it would have become food for the beasts in the underground Colosseum. To be able to be kept by Mr. is its great fortune, Wei Beitong said with a smile. Li Daochong could have just let the little monkey sit on his shoulder without saying a word. Even if Wei Beitong left, he probably wouldn't have said anything. He said this to test the waters. First, he wanted to see if Wei Beitong didn't know the origins of the little monkey. Second, He wanted Wei Beitong to agree to let the little monkey stay. That way, when the little monkey grew up, Wei Beitong wouldn't be able to say anything. There wouldn't be any grudges between them. However, if Wei Beitong had known that the little monkey was a shabi, he probably wouldn't have given it to Li Daochong. The shabi hadn't appeared in the Federation for thousands of years. This kind of divine beast was comparable to true dragons and true phoenixes. If one could establish a soul contract with it and make it their soul-bonded beast, it would become the most powerful combat partner. Moreover, the shabi was the most feared spirit beast of the Dark Ghost. From Wei Beitong's answer, it seemed that he had no idea what this little monkey was. However, this wasn't strange because Li Daochong hadn't seen any clues. If not for the hot-blooded upgrader, Li Daochong would have thought it was a very ordinary mountain monkey. It couldn't even be considered a spirit beast. After Wei Beitong said this, Li Daochong nodded slightly. The matter came to an end. From now on, the little monkey belonged to Li Daochong. The little monkey was quite well behaved. First, it sat on Li Daochong's shoulder. Then, it simply lay down and slept. Only its big eyes would occasionally squint and shoot a few cold glances at Wei Beitong. It seemed that it was still holding a grudge against the old man for injuring it. If it weren't for the fact that it was still a child, it would have rushed up and torn this old man to shreds. However, Wei Beitong didn't notice it at all. He continued to chat with Li Daochong. After leaving the Li family, Wei Ziying asked in confusion, "Grandpa, why are you so respectful to Li Daochong? You act like he's a soul formation perfected cultivator." "Ziying, that's because you don't know the wonders of qi manipulation. The ancient cultivators were more conservative, but they were more studious than modern cultivators. They were even willing to spend their entire lives researching a secret technique. Modern cultivators, on the other hand, are too impetuous and only look at immediate benefit. Many secret techniques have already been lost." Since Li Daochong was able to comprehend the qi manipulation technique, his future achievements will be limitless. Grandpa is also doing this so that the Wei family will have a strong support in the future. Now that the Federation is in turmoil, the Nether Realm seems to have recovered a lot of its vitality. I'm afraid that the Great Tribulation won't be too far away. Grandpa is old and can't support the Wei family forever. In the future, it will still depend on the younger generation. Is the qi manipulation technique really so miraculous? Wei Ziying's eyes flashed with confusion. The so-called qi manipulation technique is the ability to freely control the spiritual energy in your body after releasing it outside your body. It's somewhat similar to telekinesis. It's like a second form of telekinesis. The difference is that telekinesis is an invisible field substance, while spiritual energy is an energy substance. The field substance can only be used for detection, or if it's condensed enough, it can be used to attack something similar to a field. However, it can't affect physical objects. For example, if you attack a person, telekinesis can only damage their mind and soul, but it can't cause any damage to their body. Similarly, if you can't hurt, you can't heal. Spiritual energy can't harm the mind, but it can harm the body. At the same time, it can also heal the body. Everything in the spirit world relies on spiritual energy. Without spiritual energy, everything will wither away. The ancient cultivators discovered this point, which was why they developed the miraculous qi manipulation technique. Wei Beitong very patiently explained to his most beloved granddaughter. Wei Ziying didn't fully understand. Although she didn't fully understand, as long as it was her grandfather's words, she was sure that it was an amazing secret technique. It seemed that she had to redefine Li Daochong's importance. After sending off the Wei family's grandfather and granddaughter, Li Daochong immediately went to the room where Princess Catherine was imprisoned. After the battle, Li Daochong hadn't asked about this snake girl. When she saw Li Daochong, Princess Catherine couldn't help but tremble. After the Blood Ape King appeared, Princess Catherine thought that she was saved. Although Li Daochong had placed a restriction on her, Princess Catherine believed that the Blood Ape King could definitely remove it. However, even if Princess Catherine grew 100 heads, she would never have thought that the Blood Ape King wouldn't be a match for Li Daochong. This was too King illogical. The Blood Ape King was a peak Jin Dan cultivator. The blood of the Blood Ape tribe flowed in his body. Previously, Princess Catherine only felt that Li Daochong was very strong, but not to the point where he was undefeatable. Now, looking at Li Daochong again, it was as if she was looking at an unshakable mountain. "Are you here to kill me?" Princess Catherine asked faintly. "No." Li Daochong took out some tools and replied simply. "Then are you here to punish me and teach me a lesson?" Princess Catherine was scared witless. "No, I'm here to take the poison," Li Daochong replied. "It's been less than a month since the last time." Princess Catherine felt relieved. "It's okay. Take as much as you can. It's best if you work harder on your cultivation. When you reach the Jin Dan stage, the amount of usnea poison you secrete every month should be a lot more." Li Daochong opened Princess Catherine's mouth as he spoke and placed a glass tube inside. Princess Catherine's cherry lips were extremely beautiful. One look at them and one would have the urge to kiss them. However, when her cherry lips opened, 2 long and sharp fangs would be revealed. They were at least 1.5 inches long. If one was bitten by these 2 fangs, it would not be easy to break free. However, there were 2 extremely small holes at the tip of these 2 fangs. They were the size of needle-tip. Once bitten, the poison would immediately be injected into the target's body. Of course, it could also be spat out under Princess Catherine's control. When Li Daochong was taking out the poison, he suddenly reached out and grabbed Princess Catherine's neck. The latter's relaxed heartstrings were suddenly pulled back. Her beautiful eyes looked at Li Daochong in disbelief. Princess Catherine wanted to shout, but she couldn't. She wanted to speak, but she couldn't. The hand that grabbed her neck was like an iron clamp. Princess Catherine's breathing became difficult. Her eyes were filled with fear, confusion, and shock as she looked at Li Daochong. It was as if she was saying, "Since you want to kill me, why did you lie to me?" Just when Princess Catherine was in despair, the hand on her neck did not increase its strength. It just firmly controlled her. Immediately after, a stream of spiritual energy poured into Princess Catherine's body. It rushed straight to the root of Princess Catherine's poison vein. Princess Catherine felt as if her body had been injected with a cardiac stimulant. She began to twist and was actually forced to transform. Not long after, she turned into a giant python. The poison sac that had not completely gathered began to swell and was soon filled to the brim. The usnea's poison flowed continuously from the fangs into the glass tube. The giant python that Princess Catherine had turned into became more and more dispirited. Its intense twisting became slower and slower. Princess Catherine felt as if her body had been hollowed out. She could no longer maintain her transformed state. Even under Li Daochong's stimulation, she was unable to transform. Little by little, she shrank and returned to her human form. The transformed Princess Catherine's clothes had long been torn apart. At this moment, her soft, snow-white body was paralyzed on the ground, gasping for breath. Li Daochong's hand loosened. He looked at the usnea's poison that had been collected in the glass tube with satisfaction. There was more than 30 milliliters. Princess Catherine, who was lying on the ground, was extremely weak. At this moment, even a mortal would be able to manipulate her at will. The snake woman's figure was graceful and charming. Her soul-stirring curves were more exciting than any art piece. Just a glance would be able to stimulate the lust of any male creature. In fact, even Li Daochong was no exception. However, those with powerful telekinesis could resist distracting thoughts. Li Daochong put away the glass tube and looked down at Princess Catherine, who was lying on the ground. He said indifferently, "I don't want to use this method of killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. It will damage your Yao Dan. If you do it a few more times, your Yao Dan will shatter. At that time, you will be like the Blood Ape King and can only be a monster. If you sincerely submit to me, you will have many benefits in the future. If you have any thoughts of betraying me again, I will squeeze the essence of your Yao Dan dry in one go and extract enough poison so that you will forever be a big snake and be released into the wilderness. At that time, you will lose all your cultivation. Your soul will still be there, but you will not have any strength. You can imagine what will happen in the wilderness. Oh, right, I probably won't put you in the wilderness of the human territory. I think the Hades wilderness might be more suitable for you. Master, Princess Catherine won't dare to do it again. Princess Catherine crawled on the ground naked. Her round buttocks were raised high. Her body was slightly trembling. She no longer had any thoughts of betrayal. Chapter 401. After Li Daochong left the room where Princess Catherine was placed under house arrest, he immediately went to the underground city to see old Devil Zhang. The Tsang ink saber could no longer be used, so it had to be upgraded. The mysterious magic gold he brought back from the Dead Star also needed old Devil Zhang to appraise it. Half an hour later, in old Devil Zhang's personal refining room in the shadow-secluded square, the old man was carefully examining the blue stone on the ground. Next to him was a table that had been crushed. This table was not made of wood, but of metal mixed with some silver. When Li Daochong took out the blue stone and placed it on top of the table that old Devil Zhang had used for more than 10 years immediately collapsed. Old Devil Zhang looked at the blue stone in amazement and used all kinds of instruments to examine it. Every time the results came out, old Devil Zhang's expression would be a little more surprised. Brotherly, if this old man is not wrong, this is a heavy Silver Age essence core that has been compressed for hundreds of thousands of years. Its weight is amazing, and such a small piece weighs thousands of pounds. The heavy Silver Age essence core itself is a mysterious magic gold, and the heavy Silver Age essence core is a high-level magic gold used to make mysterious spirit treasures. Even if it has been immersed in death chi for thousands of years, its characteristics will not change. This is a treasure that can only be found by chance. Even Yuanian cultivators may not have a mysterious spirit treasure, old Devil Zhang explained with an expression of disbelief. Li Daochong took out the Tsang ink and handed it to old Devil Zhang. Old Devil Zhang, can this Tsang ink be restored? Old Devil Zhang took the Tsang ink and looked at it, then said, "It can be restored, but it will take some time. If this heavy Silver Age essence core can be added to it, it can reach the level of a mysterious spirit treasure without forming a weapon soul." Li Daochong was going to leave the Blue Bay Star tomorrow, so he naturally did not have that much time. He asked, "How long will it take?" Old Devil Zhang replied, "Brotherly, to tell you the truth, even if my cultivation is restored, it will take half a month to melt the heavy Silver Age essence core. Right now, I can't melt it at all. Even if I can melt it with my ability, I can't make a mysterious spirit treasure, which is a field that only Yuanian cultivators can reach." Li Daochong showed a look of regret, then he put the heavy Silver Age essence core away. Old Devil Zhang left. He was about to leave when old Devil Zhang said, "Brotherly, a mysterious spirit treasure is not something that a refiner can make. You are about to enter the North Star University. As one of the 4 famous schools in the Federation, the North Star University's refining department is not weak at all. Maybe you can ask the dean of the refining college to help you repair the Tsang ink." Kai Lian, the dean of the North Star University's refining college, is a very famous master refiner in the Federation. With his help, your Tsang ink will definitely be a mysterious spirit treasure. Thank you for your advice, old Devil Zhang. Li Daochong nodded. When he left, Li Daochong told old Devil Zhang about the space crack under the Heavenly Palace Club and asked him to contact Tsing Jiao. When Li Daochong left the Dead Star, he released a GPS device. After several days of positioning, he had found the real location of the dead star. In the six-ring star field, after the location was determined, he could basically conclude that there would not be any powerful dark ghosts on the dead star. It was just a lost dead star. It was an accident that the king of Kukui had appeared on the dead star. It was not of much value to Li Daochong. He might as well do old Devil Zhang a favor and let him cooperate with Tsing Jiao to develop the dead star. It was nothing to Li Daochong, but it was a super gift to old Devil Zhang and Tsing Jiao. Before Li Daochong left, he helped old Devil Zhang treat his internal injuries. Li Daochong did not have the ability to treat them before, but now that he had entered the Jin Dan stage, helping old Devil Zhang was just a small matter. Old Devil Zhang had always thought that his internal injuries would never be healed. He did not expect Li Daochong to treat them so quickly. Although old Devil Zhang's cultivation had not recovered immediately, there were no obstacles in the circulation of his internal spirit, and his internal injuries were completely healed. It would not be long before old Devil Zhang could return to Jin Dan. Old Devil Zhang could not repay these two big gifts. He immediately decided to leave the Blue Bay Star with Li Daochong and go to the North Star University. Kai Lian and old Devil Zhang were comrades in arms. They were both military equipment refiners and had worked together for many years. After retiring from the army, the two walked different paths. One walked all the way to the dark and entered the Shadow Serene Square, while the other walked all the way to the white and became a professor at a famous school. As for the space crack, after old Devil Zhang told Tsing Jiao about it, this ambitious woman who wanted to climb to the top of the Shadow Serene Square immediately used her authority to organize people to go to the Blue Bay Star. If they could develop a dead star, Tsing Jiao would have made a great contribution and would definitely be of great value to the Shadow Serene Square. However, this matter did not have much to do with Li Daochong. Tsing Jiao only needed to know that this was a big gift from him. There was also another important person, Hu Ling-er. Li Daochong did not know how to deal with her. Hu Ling-er's cultivation was higher. This demon fox was a bit strange. Li Daochong could not plant a restriction in her soul and control her. Hu Ling-er took out a few valuable items in exchange for her freedom. Li Daochong did not have much time and did not want to waste too much time on this demon fox. He took the items and let her go. Everything was settled. The next day, a young man, an old man, a mountain monkey, and a snake woman boarded the space shuttle and left the Blue Bay Star. Li Daochong only took the little monkey and Princess Catherine with him. Originally, he wanted to take Yinping with him, but Li Daochong gave up on the idea in the end. He felt that Yinping was still too young and her cultivation was too low. It would be more dangerous for her to follow him. Now, she had two powerful demon beasts protecting her. Her father, Li Tianyong, had recovered. There were also 8 original core members of the Blood Knife Society. 3 of them were at the early Jin Dan stage, and the other 5 were at the peak of the Foundation establishment stage. With such a protective force, there were very few forces in the 4-ring starfield that could shake them. As for the dark ghosts, even if a soul catcher ghost appeared in the Blue Bay Star, it would be very difficult to shake the Li family. Unless a large number of soul catcher ghosts appeared or Wu ghost level dark ghosts appeared. Li Daochong did not take a single cent of the wealth that he had quickly accumulated. He left it all for his father to control and use for future development. There was also a portion left for Yinping and Li Qinyao to cultivate. Before Li Daochong left, he gave Yinping another big gift. Other than opening all of her spirit meridians, he also helped her cultivate her spirit root. Li Daochong also copied a copy of the psychokinesis battle technique and gave it to Yinping so that she could cultivate it. Yinping really wanted to leave with Li Daochong, but she also knew that she would be a burden. She could only hold back her tears and watch as Li Daochong boarded the space shuttle and flew away. One day later, Li Daochong arrived at the Red Sun Star. There was still half a month before he had to report to North Star University. There were still some resources on the Red Sun star that needed to be gathered. Of course, his two teachers were also here. Li Daochong wanted to visit them. Li Daochong originally planned to bring Li Tianyang and the others to the Red Sun star to develop. However, plans could not be changed. After the Blood Knife Society's assets were all transferred to the Li family, it would not be long before the Blue Bay star became even more prosperous than the Red Sun star. Seeing that his father seemed to have special feelings for the Blue Bay star, Li Daochong gave up on the idea of moving the Red Sun star. In terms of position in the star field, the Blue Bay star was actually much better than the Red Sun star. It was just that the Red Sun star's development was better than the Blue Bay star's, which was why the Red Sun star was more prosperous while the Blue Bay star was more backward. From the many dark ghosts that appeared on the Red Sun star, it could be seen that the Red Sun star was closer to the edge of the fourth ring star. After arriving at the Red Sun star, Li Daochong immediately went to Beiyang University. This place had already become a branch of the North Star University. The expansion was in full swing. Qian Chonghai and Yung Byunghao walked around the construction site every day and smiled from ear to ear. In a few months, this place would become a branch of the North Star University. However, Beiyang University was still independent. Its main task was to nurture talents to participate in the joint examination of 100 schools. It could not really become a supplement to the North Star University. In fact, North Star University was just investing in the construction of Beiyang University and assisting Beiyang University in its construction. Other than that, there was nothing else. When Beiyang University could develop in the future, North Star University would be its biggest shareholder. Seeing Li Daochong return, the two elders were happy. In the future, Li Daochong would be the signboard of Beiyang University. The greater his achievements in the future, the greater the reputation of Beiyang University would be. Famous people in famous schools were famous in famous schools. This had always been an important means of publicity and reliance for universities to recruit students and attract students. After Li Daochong settled old Ghost Zhang down, he took the little monkey and Princess Catherine to the Pure Gold Hotel. He brought the little monkey because this little thing could not leave Li Daochong. If he put it down, it would immediately run back and climb onto Li Daochong's shoulder. As for Princess Catherine, Li Daochong wanted to nurture her so that she could break through as soon as possible. The sooner she entered the Jin Dan stage, the more usnea poison Li Daochong could obtain. The Pure Gold Hotel was the third Master Yin's nest. When Li Daochong stepped into the hotel, he happened to run into Sister Lan and was almost stopped by the guard again. When the guard saw Sister Lan's panicked expression in front of this unremarkable young man, his heart skipped a beat. Who was Sister Lan? She was the third Master Yin's woman, commonly known as the boss's woman. On the Red Sun planet, there were not many people who could make Sister Lan treat them with respect, not to mention the self-cultivators. The guard was secretly speechless. He was secretly glad that Sister Lan had appeared in time. Otherwise, he would have gotten himself into trouble. It was better to be more careful in the future. Otherwise, he would not even know if he had offended some big shot. Li Daochong went up to the top floor of the hotel under Sister Lan's warm greeting. The third Master Yin was not there. However, after Sister Lan told him the news, the third Master Yin, who was negotiating in the underground city, rushed to the hotel. The reason why the third Master Yin was able to make a name for himself on the Scarlet Sun planet was because of Mr. Li's reputation. In just a few months, the third Master Yin had become one of the underground leaders of the Red Sun planet. Before Li Daochong appeared, even with the support of the Yin family, the third Master Yin could only mingle in the metropolis where the Red Sun City was located. Even if he had infiltrated other places, it was very limited. His sphere of influence only covered a dozen cities. However, it was different now. The entire northern region of the Red Sun planet, including the Red Sun City, was the third Master Yin's territory. Everyone knew that the omnipotent Mr. Li was behind the Red Gold Gang. It seemed that some of the high-level self-cultivators on the Red Sun planet also knew of Mr. Li's name. It was said that a Gene Dan cultivator on the Red Sun planet praised Mr. Li. There were only a dozen or so Gene Dan cultivators on the Red Sun planet. To be able to get the support of a Gene Dan cultivator meant that the third Master Yin was one of the top cultivators on the Red Sun planet. This Gene Dan cultivator was Bai Yi, who had fought against the Ghost King with Li Daochong in the grotto. Chapter 402. In fact, Bai Yi had been looking for Li Daochong recently, but she hadn't been able to find him. It was as if Mr. Li had disappeared from Planet Crimson Sunday. Bai Yi's investigation on Li Daochong was very limited. It mainly focused on some of his activities on Planet Crimson Sunday. As for where Li Daochong came from, where he went, and what his real identity was, Bai Yi had no idea. The Federation was so big. It wasn't easy to investigate a person's background. Unless it was a person with real authority in the Federation or a cultivator who controlled a huge organization, it was impossible to investigate a person thoroughly. Bai Yi was only a cultivator from Gene Dan on a fourth-class cultivation planet. She didn't have that much power. At most, she could do whatever she wanted on Planet Crimson Sunday. Outside of Planet Crimson Sun, she was nothing. Another important reason was that Bai Yi didn't expect Li Daochong to be a student. The direction of her investigation was also a little off. She thought that Li Daochong came from an underground power. The third Master Yin had been expanding too fast recently. He was surrounded by a few underground powers and couldn't do much. After knowing that Li Daochong had returned, the third Master Yin immediately dropped everything and rushed back to the Pure Gold Hotel. The moment he saw Li Daochong, the third Master Yin almost knelt down and greeted him submissively. "Master Li, you're back. I didn't know that you were back. It's my fault for not being able to welcome you." Li Daochong didn't really like this kind of flattery. He waved his hand and said, "Don't talk nonsense. I'm here to get my dividends. I want to get it all at once. Prepare yourself. I want to see 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones in front of me within an hour." The third Master Yin's heart skipped a beat. He didn't feel good. Why did Master Li want dividends the moment he returned? How long had it been? However, he didn't dare to say no to the third Master Yin. But how could he take out 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones in an hour? Unable to advance or retreat, third Master Yin put on a long face and said, "Master Li, we originally had 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones, but some time ago, the White Ape Gang and the Ruan family joined forces with a few other gangs to surround our Crimson Gold Gang. The other three big clans of the Crimson Sun planet also joined forces to deal with the Yin family. During this period of time, all of our funds were used to deal with the other gangs. In order to fight for a grotto, even Golden Core cultivators got involved. The Yin family hired 2 Golden Core cultivators, and the expenses were extremely high. One Golden Core cultivator costs 30,000 low-grade spirit stones a day, and this is just the basic cost. The resources provided together cost around 50,000 low-grade spirit stones a day. Without a Golden Core cultivator to oversee the operation, the Yin family cannot withstand the pressure from the other party. The third Master Yin paused for a moment before continuing. "In the past month, we've spent more than 3 million low-grade spirit stones on the 2 Gene Dan cultivators. Even though we've made a lot of money recently, we can't afford to spend so much. Master Li, can you give us some time? Once we've dealt with the problem here, I'll personally exchange 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones for Master Li. What do you think?" Li Daochong frowned slightly. He didn't plan to stay on the Scarlet Sun planet for too long. He wanted to take the dividends and settle everything here. 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones was indeed a huge sum. Even for a big gang like the Pure Gold Gang, it wasn't easy for them to take it out. However, with Li Daocheng's understanding of the third master Yin and the family's strength, he could still take it out if he gritted his teeth. Li Daocheng's price wasn't high. If it wasn't for him, the family would have been exterminated. The third master Yin was able to take over the northern part of the Scarlet Sun planet because of Li Daocheng. Just based on these two matters, it was definitely worth 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones. Li Daocheng thought for a moment before saying, "You have so many properties, mines, and shares under your name. Just casually mortgage a few of them and you'll be able to get 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones." The third master Yin sighed and said, "Master Li, there's something you don't know. Right now, we've already mortgaged more than half of the properties under our name. We've gathered all of our wealth together to fight it out with the other powers. The family has been pressured very hard recently. If we don't succeed, we'll die trying." The chilling soul source crystal was discovered in the cave. That's a zenith mystery grade magic metal. The entire Scarlet Sun planet was shaken by it. All the high-level cultivators came out of their nests and waited outside the cave for the chilling soul source crystal to completely condense. Chilling soul source crystal. Li Daocheng's eyes flashed. Not long ago, he heard old Devil Zhang mention this thing. When old Devil Zhang was chatting with Li Daocheng on the way here, he said that it would be great if he could have a piece of chilling soul source crystal. If he fused it with the heavy Silver Age nucleus marrow, he would be able to bring out the properties of the two types of magic metal to the extreme. Song Ink could directly become a high-grade mystic comprehending true treasure. If the chilling soul source crystal's chilling soul was formed after it was smelted, it would naturally form an artifact soul. Song Ink even had a slight chance of becoming a zenith mystery spirit treasure. Li Daocheng immediately became interested. Just from the name of the chilling soul source crystal, it seemed very powerful. "Where's the cave?" "Bring me there," Li Daocheng immediately asked. "Lord Li, although I have some power, it's limited to mortals. I can't interfere with the affairs of cultivators. At that level, the family doesn't need me to show up. They'll take care of it themselves. If you want to go, you can only contact young Masterin. He can arrange for you to go there. The cave has been cleaned up within a radius of 300 kilometers. Without permission, no one is allowed to enter. Only a few big families can enter with their family badges." Third Master Yin replied cautiously with a troubled expression. He was afraid that he would anger Master Li by rejecting him again and again. Third Master Yin's heart was filled with bitterness. Ever since he had met Master Li, he had rejected all of his requests. But Third Master Yin didn't want to. Lord Li's request was really beyond his ability. Even if he cut off his head, he couldn't do it. "You just need to tell me the location." Li Daocheng was a bit impatient. Third Master Yin didn't dare to reject anymore. Even if he wanted to persuade Lord Li not to go, he didn't dare to say it. Third Master Yin tapped on his wristwatch and a spiritual aura map appeared. He then pointed at an area and said, "Lord Li is here." Li Daocheng narrowed his eyes when he saw it. His interest grew even stronger. The place Third Master Yin was pointing at was Shuangyuan Town, where the strange phenomenon had occurred. Originally, a spatial rift leading to the Hades had been about to open in the cave near Shuangyuan Town. Li Daocheng had blocked the spatial rift with the help of the extreme Yin compass and the Snow Lady. Li Daocheng had gone there before taking the joint examination of 100 schools, worried that the spatial rift hadn't been blocked tightly enough. However, after investigating, he found that the spatial fluctuations had been completely stabilized and no spatial rifts would appear. Only then did Li Daocheng feel at ease and take the joint examination. Only a little over a month had passed, and frost soul origin crystals had appeared in the cave. Why hadn't he sensed it when he went there? Li Daocheng found it strange that there hadn't been any magic gold fluctuations at all. Li Daocheng turned on his wristwatch and quickly searched for an introduction to frost soul origin crystals on the spirit intranet. It didn't take him long to find the relevant information. After reading it, Li Daochong understood. It turned out that the formation of frost soul origin crystals was very special. First, the environment had to be a place of extreme een, the ice source point. At the same time, there was a kind of frost jade in that area at the beginning. The frost jade would slowly condense under the nourishment of the extreme een qi. The bigger the frost jade bed, the higher the quality of the condensed frost soul origin crystals. This process would take about a few hundred years. When the frost soul origin crystals finally condensed into frost soul origin crystals, it would take several years for an ice crystal cocoon to form around the core. During this time, even a cultivator like Yuanying wouldn't be able to sense any magic gold fluctuations within 10 meters of it. They wouldn't be able to detect it even with dense spiritual detection equipment. When the ice crystal cocoon began to shatter, the magic gold fluctuations of the frost soul origin crystals would spread out. However, before the ice crystal cocoon completely shattered, no external force could be used to forcibly extract the frost soul origin crystals. Otherwise, the quality would be greatly reduced. What was more, what one would obtain wouldn't be frost soul origin crystals but frost jade essence, which would become another kind of magic gold with a lower grade. It was no wonder that the Jin Dan cultivators on planet Crimson Sun could only stand outside and watch. After Li Daochong learned more about the situation from Third Master Yin, he left Princess Catherine behind and flew away with the little monkey. The little monkey was only the size of 2 palms and could be carried in his arms. Moreover, this little thing was very slippery and easy to protect. It wasn't so convenient to carry Princess Catherine. Shuangyuan town was very far from Crimson Sun City. It was more than 10,000 kilometers away. Back then, Li Daochong had to take a shuttle bus and a special car to get to Shuangyuan town. Now, he didn't have to go through so much trouble. Li Daochong could reach the town in 1 or 2 hours if he flew at full speed. However, it would consume a lot of energy. Li Daochong couldn't care less at this time. According to Third Master Yin's description, the Frost Soul Origin Crystal was at the final stage of breaking out of its cocoon. It could break out of its cocoon at any time. This Frost Soul Origin Crystal was half the size of a water tank. This was also the reason why the major powers were willing to cooperate. When the time came to divide it, it would be enough for their use. At this moment, there were dozens of cultivators guarding the entrance of the cave. They were divided into 3 groups. One group was led by the Yin clan, a group led by the other 3 major clans on planet Crimson Sun, and a group of rogue cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday. These 3 groups had gathered almost all the high-level cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday. There were more than 12 Jin Dan cultivators. The other 3 clans had joined forces because the 2 Jin Dan cultivators hired by the Yin clan were the 2 strongest Jin Dan cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday. Originally, planet Crimson Sun had 3 great experts. They were Lu Xingzhan, Bai Yi, and Old Gun. However, 2 months ago, Lu Xingzhan had suddenly fallen. Of the 3 great experts on planet Crimson Sun, only 2 were left. Each of the 3 clans had 1 Jin Dan old ancestor. They had also hired 2 Jin Dan cultivators. In total, there were 5 Jin Dan cultivators. All of them were at the early Jin Dan stage. The rogue cultivators' camp also consisted of 5 Jin Dan cultivators. As a result, the 12 Jin Dan cultivators on planet Crimson Sun were all present. It was a stalemate between 2, 5, and 5. Although the Yin clan had the least number of people, they still had Old Gun, who was at the peak of the intermediate Jin Dan stage. He was also the only intermediate Jin Dan cultivator on planet Crimson Sunday. Although Bai Yi was only at the early Jin Dan stage, her actual combat power was much higher than that of an ordinary Jin Dan cultivator. She could definitely take on 2 of them on her own. This situation had been maintained for more than half a month. There was no lack of verbal conflict, but no one made a move. No one wanted to be the first to break the stalemate. The three major powers were not willing to submit to each other, nor did they want to cooperate. After all, they already had enough people in their own camp. If they added more people, they would not be able to get much. It was also because of the existence of the three major powers that they did not make a move. Chapter 403. Li Daochong flew all the way. 3 hours later, he appeared outside Shuangyuan town without anyone noticing. The temperature here had obviously dropped a lot. A layer of frost had condensed on the ground, and it was very cold. Li Daochong looked around and then moved his telekinesis slightly. He immediately detected the exact location of the grotto. The area within 300 kilometers was actually a no-fly zone. There were also spiritual magnetic network warnings and people patrolling. However, it was obviously impossible for these to stop Li Daochong. Li Daochong stopped flying and walked toward the grotto. Every step he took was like an ordinary person taking a stroll, but with each step, he was dozens of meters away. More than 10 minutes later, Li Daochong arrived near the grotto. The temperature here dropped again. The frost on the ground had condensed into ice cubes, and the trees were directly turned into ice sculptures. However, it was summer in the northern part of Red Sun Planet. It was the hottest season of the year, but now the temperature here was 50 to 60 degrees below zero. If an ordinary person did not wear special clothes to resist the cold, they would be frozen into a popsicle in a short time. Of course, such a low temperature did not have much effect on Li Daochong. After being reborn, his spiritual body reached perfection. He did not need to control his qi. He could easily resist the cold with just his physical body. Li Daochong hid all his aura and hid under a tree to quietly observe the situation in the direction of the grotto. Sure enough, the situation was similar to what Third Master Yin had described. The three forces looked at each other in a triangular formation. 12 Jin Dan cultivators sat cross-legged on 12 large bluestones. These bluestones didn't exist when Li Daochong came here for the first time. They must have been moved here by someone later. Although Li Daochong's strength had increased rapidly and he was not afraid of these Jin Dan cultivators on Red Sun Planet, he did not want to become the fourth force. Once the situation of the three forces was broken, a war would inevitably break out. If Li Daochong was alone, he could walk out openly and tell everyone to get lost. However, the Yin family had a good relationship with him, and Li Daochong had always regarded Ding Bang and Ansinuo as friends. If a fight really broke out, the two opposing forces had a lot of people. In a chaotic battle, Li Daochong didn't have the confidence to protect the Yin family. There would definitely be casualties. Therefore, the best way was to sneak into the Yin family's camp and maintain the balance of power. As for what would happen later, all they had to do was wait and see. So how could he sneak in? Li Daochong quietly observed for a while before noticing that from time to time, some cultivators would come out to patrol the area. Li Daochong's eyes flickered slightly and his power of will spread out. It did not take long for him to detect the return of a cultivator from the Yin family who had been patrolling outside. Next, Li Daochong went into stealth mode. When he was over 20 kilometers away from the grotto, he intercepted the cultivator and knocked him unconscious. After putting on the cultivator's clothes and equipment, he put on a disguise before sneaking into the Yin family's camp. Li Daochong hadn't seen the Yin siblings for a while. At this moment, Ansinuo and Ding Bang were sitting cross-legged on either side of the Yin family's patriarch, Anmonian. Ansinuo was already at the middle stage of the Qi-gathering realm, while Ding Bang was at the peak stage of the Qi-gathering realm. Even Anmonian's cultivation had improved a little. The Yin family members were all around Anmonian. In addition to a few Foundation establishment cultivators from the Yin family, there were also many guest cultivators, about 20 of them. In front of them were Bai Yi and Old Gun. The two of them had fought a life-and-death battle with Li Daochong in the grotto a few months ago and hadn't seen each other since. Li Daochong's power of will had long surpassed that of a foundation establishment cultivator. With a little interference, the cultivator who changed shifts didn't realize that the returning cultivator was no longer his colleague. He even nodded at Li Daochong before flying away. Li Daochong quietly entered the crowd. Coincidentally, the cultivator he knocked out was wearing a straw hat. He was a Ronin cultivator. Li Daochong had seen this person when he went to the Yin family to rescue them. He felt a little embarrassed to knock him out. This Ronin cultivator carried a katana with him. The blade was slightly curved, 2 fingers wide, and the tip was extremely sharp. This kind of katana was deeply loved by Ronin cultivators. It was forged from a mixture of pan silver and gung silver. The entire blade was silver and 1.3 meters long. It was very suitable for slashing and piercing. Its weight was also relatively moderate, around 50 kilograms. It was the best weapon for Foundation establishment Ronin cultivators. Ronin cultivators were actually a type of rogue cultivator. This person's cultivation was at the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm and wasn't considered an expert here. Li Daochong suppressed his cultivation to the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm and lowered his straw hat. No one noticed him as he blended into the Yin family's camp. The 3 forces were on guard against each other. The 12 Jin Dan cultivators seemed to be sitting cross-legged with their eyes closed in a meditative state. In fact, their telekinesis was always on high alert. If there was any movement around them, they would be the first to discover it. Li Daochong wasn't in a hurry. After blending into the Yin family's camp, he also sat cross-legged and used his telekinesis to explore the grotto in front of him. He quickly understood the situation in the grotto. 100 meters underground in the deepest part of the grotto, there was an ice crystal cocoon the size of a water tank that was full of cracks. It seemed like it could completely collapse at any time. An intense cold air surged out from within. Even Li Daochong felt a bone-chilling cold. The surrounding temperature had dropped because of this. Just as Li Daochong was exploring, the ice crystal cocoon suddenly trembled. Kabie kabie, crisp cracking sounds could be heard. The fragments of the ice crystal cocoon began to fall, revealing the ice-like substance inside. However, compared to the icicles, it was more crystalline and translucent. It shone like a diamond. Even though there was no light underground, it still emitted a golden glow. This was the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. When Li Daochong discovered that the ice crystal cocoon had begun to crack, the 12 Jin Dan cultivators naturally discovered it as well. Almost at the same time, the 12 Jin Dan cultivators opened their eyes at the same time. A hint of excitement flashed across their eyes. The Frost Soul Origin Crystal was the Dharma gold used to make Dharma treasures and weapons of the Mystic Spirit treasure level. Not to mention the Jin Dan cultivators, even the Yuanian cultivators would find it difficult to obtain a Mystic Spirit treasure. Mystic Spirit treasures were already the top Dharma treasures in the Federation. Even Soul Formation Grand cultivators used them. This showed how precious the Frost Soul Origin Crystal was. Once obtained, it could be used to make a Mystic Spirit treasure. Even if they couldn't obtain the other materials, they could use the Frost Soul Origin Crystal to make a superior grade Mystic Spirit treasure. Faced with such a huge temptation, these Jin Dan cultivators couldn't hide the excitement in their hearts. However, even though they couldn't hold it in anymore, no one made any moves. The 3 families were led by 3 patriarchs. These 3 patriarchs were Yi Zhengtu of the Yi family, Dong Yuan of the Dong family, and Shiman Jin of the Shiman family. It seemed like the descendants of the Black Tortoise Yi family were everywhere in the 4th ring star zone. This was enough to show how powerful the Black Tortoise Yi family was. The 3 patriarchs looked at each other. Then, Yi Jingtu looked at Old Gun of the Yin family and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Daoist Xiang, it's not a good idea for us to be in a stalemate like this. When the treasure is born, it's up to the capable. I estimate that this ice crystal cocoon will completely shatter in 2 or 3 hours and the frost soul origin crystal will appear. Since none of us are willing to give in and there are so many people, why don't we have a competition? Whoever wins in the end will get the frost soul origin crystal. As soon as Yi Jingtu finished speaking, the lone cultivators and the family looked at each other. Old Gun's original name was Xiang Ding. He was called Old Gun because of the weapon he used. However, not many people knew his real name. Old Gun and Bai Yi exchanged a few words through voice transmission. Then, Old Gun said loudly, "Fellow Taoist Yi, fellow Taoist Xiang and fellow Taoist Bai have no objections. However, our agreement doesn't count. If fellow Taoist Wang and the others don't agree, your proposal will go down the drain." The fellow Taoist Wang that Old Gun mentioned was the leader of the lone cultivators, Wang Qianxi. His cultivation was at the peak of the early stage Jin Dan. Apart from Wang Qianxi, the other 4 people on the lone cultivator's side were Taoist Master Formless Qin Yuan, Taoist Master Kongming Lu Jingtian, Old Man Green Bamboo Zhang Shou, and Fairy Piaoling Zhou Rong. Lone cultivators did not have any power. However, they relied on their own efforts to reach the Jin Dan realm. They had rich combat experience. In terms of strength, they were much stronger than Jin Dan cultivators who grew up under the protection of their families. Although this was not absolute, it was applicable in most cases. Lone cultivators were more suited for one-on-one battles. The 5 lone cultivators looked at each other and secretly discussed the matter through voice transmission. "Fellow Taoist Wang, I think we can agree." Taoist Master Formless, Qin Yuan, expressed his agreement. "I object. If we fight one-on-one, Old Gun and Bai Yi will have a huge advantage. If we attack them together, we still have a chance of winning. However, if we attack them one by one, we'll just be sending ourselves to our death." Taoist Master Kongming, Lu Jingtian, immediately raised his objection. Lu Jingtian was right. The 5 of them fell silent for a while. Then, an old voice sounded. "I think we can agree," Old Man Green Bamboo Zhang Shou said. "Why? Old Man Zhang, do you want to send yourself to your deaths as well?" Taoist Master Kongming, Lu Jingtian, was anxious. "Fellow Taoist Lu, don't be impatient. It's not the 5 of us fighting Old Gun. Don't forget that there's still Yi Jingtu and the rest. As long as we make the right arrangements, it'll be most beneficial to our side. No matter how powerful Old Gun is, he'll still be tired. If we attack them one by one, it might seem like we'll be benefiting the powerful Old Gun and Bai Yi, but there are 2 great benefits for us," Old Man Green Bamboo said unhurriedly. "What are the 2 great benefits?" Lu Jingtian did not understand. The other 3 also pricked up their ears and looked at Old Man Green Bamboo. After a pause, the old voice sounded again. "First, the battle is not a life and death battle. This way we can avoid death. No matter how good the treasure is, I believe that none of you want to lose your lives. Even if the battle is a little too harsh, we can still save our companions and ensure their lives." This time, Lu Jingtian nodded as well. Old Man Green Bamboo continued, "Second, because it's not a life and death battle, we can give it our all and weaken Old Gun and Bai Yi to the greatest extent. How long can they last if we fight them one by one? Because we're stronger than Yi Jingtu and the rest in actual combat, we can gain an advantage in the end." After hearing this, Lu Jingtian no longer objected. Seeing that no one objected, Wang Qianxi turned around and replied, "We agree as well." Old Gun nodded and then looked at Yi Jingtu. "Fellow Taoist Yi, since you're the one who suggested the battle, how do we do it?" Yi Jingtu was already prepared. Yi Jingtu was already prepared for this. A hint of a smile flashed across his eyes as he replied, "It's very simple. The first round of the competition will be decided by the wheel. Which 2 parties will go on stage, the third party will be given a bye. The winner of the first round will continue to compete with the person sent by the third party. The winner of the first round can continue to compete with the person sent by the third party. The winner of the first round can continue to compete with the person sent by the third party. The winner of the first round can continue to compete with the person sent by the third party. The winner can continue to compete with the winner, or they can also arrange another person to compete. In short, the winner will remain in the arena, while the loser will be given a bye for the next round. However, the loser of any round will not be allowed to compete again. But because there are only two of you, fellow Taoist Xiang and fellow Taoist Bai, you can decide for yourselves. In the end, the last person to remain in the arena will be the winner. After hearing this, there was a pause for a few seconds. The rogue cultivators and the Yin clan were both considering the rationality of the rules. The 12 Jin Dan cultivators were silent, but the other cultivators were discussing animatedly, all talking at once. However, no one dared to speak too loudly. They had no right to speak here. If they angered the Jin Dan cultivators, it would not end well for them. Senior Ye's suggestion is quite good. We're all cultivators of the Scarlet Sun planet, so why do we have to fight to the death? It's quite good that we don't have to fight to the death. That's right, that's right. We all know each other. If we really want to fight, I really can't bring myself to do it. I wonder what Yi Jingtu is up to, someone muttered softly. I don't know what's going on, but it's quite good to be able to witness a battle between Jin Dan cultivators. Many cultivators in the Yin clan's camp felt that it was unreasonable. After all, there were too few of them. There were only Old Gun and Bai Yi, while the other two sides had 5 people each. If they calculated it this way, it felt like the other two sides were ganging up to deal with the Yin clan. Hearing the discussions around him, Li Daochong had a strange expression on his face. Yi Jingtu had suddenly proposed a battle to determine the ownership of the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. He felt that something was wrong. Suddenly, Li Daochong's expression froze. He seemed to have thought of something and immediately said, "Senior Xiang, Senior Bai, you can't agree to it." This shout was very sudden. The discussions around them were not loud. Instantly, all eyes were cast on the guy wearing a straw hat standing among the Yin clan cultivators. Old Gun said in a low voice, "Why can't we agree?" Li Daochong's face was hidden under the straw hat. He replied, "Because there's a problem with the winning rules. Why don't we change it so that the side that wins the most battles will be the final winner instead of the side that stays in the end?" As soon as Li Daochong finished speaking, a wave of pressure came from Yi Jingtu's body. The cultivators standing around Li Daochong suddenly felt their blood and qi churn. They felt extremely uncomfortable and their legs trembled involuntarily. Jin Dan's pressure was not something they could withstand. After hearing this, the corners of Yi Jingtu's eyes twitched violently. This damned ant dared to ruin his carefully thought-out plan. Chapter 404. After Old Gun and Bai Yi heard the Straw Hat cultivator's words, they looked at each other and quickly thought of something. Yi Jingtu had said a lot of things, but in fact, he was trying to cover it up. He wanted everyone's attention to be focused on the competition and ignored the clause about who would win in the end. Even Old Gun and Bai Yi had ignored the key point. They felt that with their strength, they would have no problem standing until the end. However, it would be useless even if they won 7 or 8 rounds. As long as they lost 1 round and were no longer on the field, they would lose. Due to their disadvantage in numbers, as long as they went on the field, they would have to stay on the field and would not even have a chance to breathe. If they lost, they would have to change people. The winning side could also change people. This way, the other side would keep a spot. Even if they lost this round, they would have a bye in the next round and the other side would send someone to fight again. This was clearly a trap for Old Gun and Bai Yi. "Fellow Taoist Yi, I think this little friend is right. Why is it not the side that wins the most rounds but the side that stands at the end the winner?" Old Gun's expression darkened. Yi Jingtu's face was ashen. Originally, He didn't need to burn his essence blood to deal with Old Pow. However, after the Straw Hat Cultivator's words, he couldn't back down now. In front of so many people, he couldn't back down now. Fortunately, he could still use the Black Tortoise bloodline. However, he would have to pay a huge price. Damn Straw Hat Cultivator. Once I get rid of Old Gun and Bai, you will be the first person I kill. Yijingtu's face twitched as he thought about it. If that's the case, then we'll determine the winner based on the side with the most wins. Old Gun's expression relaxed. If that's the case, I agree to the competition. Wang Qianxi immediately expressed his agreement. Immediately after, the 12 Jin Dan cultivators bit their fingertips and made a blood oath. If they agreed to bet, they had to accept defeat. Whoever went back on their word would be struck by lightning. For cultivators, blood oaths were extremely intimidating. Once violated, they would encounter a powerful lightning tribulation when they tried to make a breakthrough. Then, Old Gun, Yijingtu, and Wang Qianxi walked to the middle of the field to check the wheel. After the three of them confirmed that there was no problem with the wheel, they placed it on the ground and let a weak rogue cultivator spin it. When the rogue cultivator attacked, 3 streams of telekinesis were added to his body, so he didn't dare to make any strange movements. He could only rely on his arm strength to spin the wheel. In the end, the wheel pointed to Wang Qianxi. In the first round, the rogue cultivator's side was left empty. One side of the 3 great clans against the Yin clan. The first match was Old Gun's turn. He had already discussed it with Bai. Old Gun would be the first to fight and would have a second chance to fight. Bai would be the second to fight. If she lost, she would not fight again. Brother Yi, are you going to fight or should I? Dong Yuan's telekinetic voice sounded in Yijingtu's ear. Old brother Dong, I'll go. Leave your trump card to Bai. That guy with the straw hat just said a few words and we had to pay the price of losing half of our lifespan. Once this is over, the first person we'll kill will be him, Yijingtu replied with a cold expression. Brother Yi, don't worry. That ant won't be able to see tomorrow's sun, Dong Yuan said. Yijingtu and Old Gun stood 5 meters apart and faced each other. The 3 forces retreated. A battle between Jin Dan cultivators was not something that could be watched at close range. If one was not careful, they would be injured by the aftershock. There was even a possibility that they would be killed. Those below the level of Jin Dan could not withstand the aftershocks of a battle between Jin Dan cultivators. Other than the 10 Jin Dan cultivators who only retreated 100 meters, the rest retreated 500 meters. Brother Yi, I heard that your Yi clan's Black Tortoise bloodline is extremely domineering and its defense is indestructible. I wonder if my Sky Bell Hammer can break through your Black Tortoise defense, Old Gun said with a relaxed expression. Brother Xiang, why don't you try and find out? Yijingtu's eyes flashed with a sinister light. As you wish. The smile on Old Gun's face instantly disappeared. He extended his hand and the Sky Bell Hammer appeared out of thin air. Old Gun did not want to prolong the battle. The longer it dragged on, the greater the consumption of his energy. Since he had fewer people on his side, he wanted to end the battle quickly. Old Gun did not hold back from the start. The Sky Bell Hammer shot out like a cannonball. Yijingtu had already expected Old Gun's intention. Therefore, he did not hesitate and directly ignited the Black Tortoise blood essence in his body. At the cost of his lifespan and injuring Jin Dan, he stimulated a strength that exceeded his limit. The Black Tortoise Dharma form appeared behind Yijingtu and a tortoiseshell-like shield appeared in his hand. Yijingtu's weapon was actually a shield, which surprised many people. However, upon closer inspection, they found that the shield was sharpened on all sides and emitted a cold light. Dong! There was a dull sound of impact. It was as if a giant hammer had struck a bell. The Sky Bell Hammer hit the shield, and an astonishing airwave and sound wave burst out, shaking the area. More than half of the cultivators who had retreated 500 meters away were forced to retreat. and Sinuo and Ndingbang were hiding behind a spirit magnetic shield, but they still showed a pained expression. The sound wave still penetrated the shield and hit their eardrums. They felt as if their heads were about to explode. No one noticed that among the many cultivators of the clan, the cultivator with a straw hat covering his face stood motionless in the crowd. He was completely unaffected by the airwave and sound wave. When the airwave and sound wave hit him, they automatically split apart as if to avoid him. Yi Jingtu took a small step back, and then more than 10 flying swords flew out from behind him and shot at Old Gun. The sky bell hammer returned to Old Gun's hand with a swoosh, and he swung it at the incoming flying swords. More than 10 flying swords were all sent flying. However, at this moment, Yi Jingtu had already arrived in front of Old Gun. The shield in his hand spun at an extremely high speed and slashed at Old Gun from the side. Old Gun was shocked. He didn't expect Yi Jingtu to be so fierce. He had just taken his hammer head-on and was completely fine. This seemed a little unreasonable. Old Gun was very clear about Yi Jingtu's strength. He was at the peak of the early stage of Jindan, and there was a clear gap between him and Yi Jingtu. However, now that they were fighting, Old Gun felt that he was facing a mid-stage Jindan cultivator who was on par with him. Old Gun swung his hammer again. Creak, creak, creak. The sky bell hammer and the high-speed rotating shield collided with each other, making an ear-piercing sound of friction. Sparks flew everywhere, and when the sparks fell to the ground, they immediately melted and evaporated the frost on the ground. The air was filled with the unpleasant smell of melting metal. Yi Jingtu held the shield in one hand and punched Old Gun with the other, who hurriedly blocked. With a bang, Old Gun was repelled more than 10 meters away. If it weren't for the strong resistance of the sky bell hammer on the ground, he would have been sent flying far away. Yi Jingtu's attack succeeded and he didn't stop at all. More than 10 flying swords shot out again. The continuous barrage of attacks rained down on Old Pao. The strength that Yi Jingtu showed was far beyond his usual level. He actually suppressed the number 1 master of Red Sun Planet to the point that he couldn't even fight back. The 3 great clans were naturally excited. On the other hand, the clan's side was disheartened. And Sinuo and Ndingbang both showed anxious expressions. Some of the cultivators hired by the clan began to feel a little uneasy. They no longer gathered together and instead distanced themselves as if they were ready to leave at any time. There were also a few cultivators who looked at the straw hat cultivator sympathetically. Someone shook his head and said, "That straw hat cultivator is finished. Yi Jingtu probably won't let this guy go." Isn't that so? You're just a little early-stage foundation establishment cultivator. Why did you have to steal the limelight in front of a Jindan cultivator? Even if you saw something, you had to pretend that you didn't know anything. Now, not only did you fail to steal the limelight, you even offended Yi Jingtu. Is this what they mean by being too smart for your own good? Silence is golden. Some people will never know the true meaning of these 4 words. In addition to the sarcastic remarks, 2 friends who knew the straw hat cultivator comforted him. "Su Mao, hurry up and leave now." The straw hat cultivator raised his head slightly and grinned. "Why should I leave when there's such a wonderful battle to watch?" Chapter 405. The strength Yi Jingtu displayed was far beyond his imagination. Old Gun originally wanted to end the battle quickly, but after a few moves, he was forced to retreat again and again. Soon, the onlooking cultivators saw the clues. Yi Jingtu's aura is a bit abnormal. Taoist Master Formless, Chen Yuan, had a strange expression on his face. He had a guess, but he didn't dare to confirm it. Old Man Empty Bamboo, Zhang Shou, looked a bit surprised. Fellow Taoist Yi seems determined to get the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. He didn't hesitate to burn his blood essence to fight Old Gun. I underestimated fellow Taoist Ye's determination. Fairy Piaoling, Zhou Rong's thin lips moved slightly. As a new Jean Dan cultivator, she was somewhat reserved. Originally, Bai was the only female Jean Dan cultivator on planet Crimson Sunday. Fairy Piaoling, Zhou Rong, had only appeared recently. However, Zhou Rong was different from Bai. The latter wasn't from planet Crimson Sun. She had migrated there, while Zhou Rong was born and raised there. Before entering Jean Dan, Zhou Rong was already somewhat famous among the cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday. Her skill with the Piaoling dart was superb. Zhou Rong was the kind of person who was well prepared. When she was in school, she didn't stand out and wasn't even qualified to participate in the 100 schools joint examination. However, later on, Zhou Rong traveled outside and went to the third ring star zone. After returning, her cultivation improved greatly. Then, she went to the fifth ring star zone for an adventure and broke through again. When she returned to planet Crimson Sun, she was already a late-stage foundation-building cultivator. As a female cultivator, she was quite outstanding. However, later on, Zhou Rong's cultivation speed slowed down. 5 years ago, she entered the peak of Jean Dan. After that, she didn't break through until 2 months ago when she passed by Shuangyuan town. A sudden heavy snow gave her an epiphany. She found a secluded place and went into seclusion. 1 month later, she broke through to Jean Dan. She became the second Jean Dan female cultivator on planet Crimson Sun in 100 years. Zhou Rong wasn't clear about her specific strength because she hadn't fought since she entered Jean Dan. However, when Zhou Rong was in the 5-ring starfield, she had an impressive battle record. Because there were no witnesses, only she knew about it. At that time, Zhou Rong had just reached the late stage of the foundation establishment stage. She had encountered the Red Shadow ferocious ghost on a grade 5 cultivation planet that was riddled with holes. She had killed the Red Specter with her late foundation establishment cultivation. Although it was a Pyrrhic victory, she had still won. Back in the grotto, even Bai and Jean Dan had a hard time dealing with the Red Shadow malicious ghost. Therefore, the strongest person among the rogue cultivators was actually Zhou Rong. It was just that no one knew, not even Zhou Rong herself. Zhou Rong could tell at a glance that Yi Jingtu was burning his blood essence, but she didn't say anything. As the battle between Old Gun and Yi Jingtu became more and more intense, even the cultivators with low cultivation levels could see some clues. Yi Jingtu must have either used some secret technique or burned his blood essence. In short, he must have paid a great price to obtain the strength to fight Old Gun. The moment this match started, it raised the level of the competition to a peak. For a rank 4 cultivation planet like planet Scarlet Sun, the level of the competition had reached a peak. This was a battle of the pinnacle. Old Gun was forced into a corner by Yi Jingtu and also erupted with strength that exceeded his limit. The Sky Bell hammer transformed into a giant hammer. It was the size of a small mountain. This had already surpassed the realm of cultivation techniques and reached the realm of divine powers. Cultivation techniques were ultimately a means of using the body to attack. Divine powers, on the other hand, were beyond the realm of the body. They used the spirit chi of heaven and earth, the 5 elements, and spiritual consciousness to attack. Divine powers originally meant that one's thoughts were clear. In cultivation, having a clear mind meant that one had entered a different realm. The power of cultivation techniques could not be compared to divine powers. When one cultivated a cultivation technique to the extreme, it could not uproot mountains and fill seas. Reaching the level of the Blood Ape King after his transformation was already extremely powerful. Of course, the Blood Ape King had not yet reached the extreme. His body had entered the path of Tao refinement, and his final achievement could reach Yuanying's level. It was impossible for him to go any higher. A body cultivator at Yuanying's level could only be described as terrifying. He was an indestructible steel puppet that could drill into a planet and use it as a blender. It was a piece of cake for him to create a giant pit in a planet with one punch. However, it was impossible for him to shatter a planet with one punch. The limit of body refinement was the unveiling stage. It was impossible to reach the soul formation stage. If one's thoughts were not clear, no matter how powerful one's physique was, one would not be able to reach the soul formation stage. In the end, one would fall behind by a level. Even if there were body cultivators in the soul formation stage, they would only have one more technique. The truly powerful ones were still divine powers. At this moment, Old Gun threw out the Skybell hammer. The hammer transformed into a few hundred meters in size. This was one of the elementary divine powers. Li Daochong's heavenly thunder spell, Eye of Thunder Punishment, was slightly more brilliant. Old Gun used a Dharma treasure, while Li Daochong used elements derived from the 5 elements. One had form while the other had no form. The power could not be judged. It depended on the strength of the user of the divine power. At the Jin Dan stage, one would already have the initial conditions to release divine powers, but it would be difficult to use them freely. Old Gun's physical strength and spirit chi were almost depleted. The Jin Dan dimmed significantly. However, if such a huge hammer were to smash down, the power would be unimaginable. A city would be razed to the ground. The cultivators, who had originally felt safe standing 500 meters away, retreated again without thinking. They only felt at ease after retreating 2 to 3 kilometers away. Some retreated, but some did not. The patriarchs of the 3 major families and a few direct descendants were protected by late-stage or peak-stage foundation establishment cultivators. They were also protected by the most advanced spirit magnetic shield in front of them. Naturally, they did not need to retreat. The siblings, Anmanian, and a few elders of the family were the same. They were surrounded by a spirit light shield. This spirit light shield could last for several hours. It was said that it could withstand a full-force attack from an early-stage Jin Dan cultivator without shattering. With this thing protecting them, they naturally did not need to retreat. However, everyone's attention was focused on the battle between the 2 great cultivators, so they neglected some details. For example, the Straw Hat cultivator, who everyone thought was doomed, was standing more than 10 meters behind the family. He had no intention of retreating. Moreover, this Straw Hat cultivator was not only unscathed from the aftershocks of the battle, but the expression on his face hidden under the straw hat was even very relaxed. The aftershocks of the battle were like a gentle breeze to him. It was not dangerous at all. In fact, it was quite comfortable. Yizheng too was shocked. This Old Gun was going to fight to the death with him. Yizheng too threw the shield in his hand. It instantly enlarged and covered the area above him like a giant turtle shell. More than 10 flying swords flew out again and shot towards Old Gun. Bang! The mountain-like hammer smashed onto the giant turtle shell and exploded with a deafening sound. The sound waves from this explosion shattered everything within a 10-kilometer radius. Trees, rocks, and even the ground were all shattered. Yizheng Tu's chest tightened. He took a deep breath and the flying swords shot towards Old Gun without slowing down. A flag appeared in Old Gun's hand. It was a flag with a top engraved on it. After throwing it out, the top on the flag transformed and mixed with the flying swords. Clang! 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 The flying swords were all repelled. Old Gun had used his divine ability twice in a row. It was already beyond what he could bear. He spat out a mouthful of blood and his face was pale. Yizheng too was not much better. However, compared to Old Gun, he seemed to have more energy left. With a shake of his hand, a flame shot out. It was a spirit talisman. Old Gun was shocked. Yizheng too really had many tricks up his sleeve. Old Gun naturally had spirit talismans as well. However, he did not plan to use them. After all, high-grade spirit talismans were too expensive. Now was not the time to be distressed over the price. If he did not use them, not only would he be defeated, he might also be seriously injured. Old Gun also released 2 spirit talismans. They were both level 10 spirit talismans. Boom! The spirit talismans collided in the air and exploded into a huge fireball with a diameter of more than 300 meters. The temperature of the cold weather suddenly rose and the frost on the ground instantly melted. Old Pao heaved a sigh of relief. He no longer hoped that he could defeat Yijingtu. A draw would be the best result. Just as Old Pao regained his senses, the fireball in the air came crashing down in his direction. What? Old Gun exclaimed as he looked at the scene in disbelief. This meant that the power of Yijingtu's fire talisman was far above that of Old Gun's spirit talisman. 2 against 1, they still could not withstand it. Old Gun used the last of his strength to retreat. Blood kept flowing out of his mouth. Boom! The huge fireball smashed into the ground and exploded. Chapter 406. A flying sword flew in front of Old Gun and stopped in midair. However, the flying sword buzzed as if it would attack at any moment and pierce through Old Gun's head. Naturally, this flying sword was controlled by Yijingtu. A trace of blood seeped out of the corner of Yijingtu's mouth. His qi and blood were unstable, but compared to Old Gun, he was still in a much better state. He did not suffer any serious internal injuries, but there were some side effects from burning his blood essence. Old Gun's final attack had shocked Yijingtu, and he had almost failed to withstand it. Looking at the flying sword, Old Gun had no choice but to admit defeat. Fellow Taoist Ye's skills are impressive. I admit defeat, Old Gun said in a low voice as he forced himself to take a deep breath. Ha ha ha, you're too kind. Fellow Taoist Xiang's heaven bell hammer shocked everyone. If I didn't have so many Dharma treasures, I would have lost to you a long time ago. Yijingtu was secretly pleased. It would be strange if he was not pleased to be able to defeat the number 1 expert of planet Crimson Sun in front of so many people. However, he still replied appropriately. Apart from the 3 major clans, the other 2 parties sneered in their hearts when they heard Yijingtu's words. You only won by a narrow margin after burning your blood essence, but you actually said you had many Dharma treasures? Why would you cultivate if you had so many Dharma treasures? Why not just get more Dharma treasures? Wouldn't that make tool refinement masters invincible? Many cultivators thought so, but they did not dare to show it. Yijingtu was a Jin Dan cultivator and the Yi clan's patriarch. He could kill you in a matter of minutes. Who would dare to mock him? Yijingtu won the first round. The 3 major clans were all delighted. Many of them did not expect Yijingtu to win. After all, Old Gun's reputation had been on planet Crimson Sun for 30 to 40 years. It was deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. On the other side, the clan members were crestfallen. Anmonian seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. His straight back bent, and his hair turned white in an instant. This time, the family had spent so much effort and almost went bankrupt to fight for the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. Aside from the fact that the treasure itself was incredibly valuable, the other reason was that Anmonian's wife and several elders had been kidnapped a month ago. The other party had only left a note with only 1 sentence written on it. If you want him alive, you have to exchange the Frost Soul Source Crystal for him. Time limit, 40 days. The other party was very mysterious. Even though the clan was one of the 4 great clans of the Scarlet Sun planet, they still couldn't find any information about the other party. Furthermore, 3 late Foundation establishment cultivators from the clan went to rescue them, but none of them returned. 3 days later, the family received a warning from the other party. If you don't behave, I'll immediately kill the hostages and slaughter the entire family. Some of the family members suggested reporting the matter to the Security Bureau. All the signs indicated that the other party was likely to be a powerful cultivator. But in the end, Anmonian rejected this suggestion. Because while the family was discussing countermeasures in the secret chamber, the kidnappers actually sent him a telepathic message. Apart from another warning, Anmonian's eldest brother, Anmachuan, and the other two foundation establishment cultivators of the family were all dumbfounded on the spot. The other party's strength was beyond the clan's comprehension. It seemed far away, but it was also right in front of them. The clan's influence on the Scarlet Sun planet was definitely at the top, but in front of the other party, they were as helpless as a little chick. The few remaining high-ranking members of the clan fell into a state of panic. The other party's background was unknown, and his strength was beyond their imagination. He wasn't someone the clan could fight against. Their only option was to exchange the Frost Soul Source crystal. Anmonian had no choice but to use everything he had and come up with a plan to seize the Frost Soul Source crystal. In fact, when Anmonian's wife was kidnapped, the Frost Soul Source crystal hadn't appeared yet. At first, the clan was confused. The Frost Soul Source crystal was an extremely rare magic metal. There weren't many of them in the entire Federation. It was an extremely important strategic resource for the Federation. The clan was very powerful on the Scarlet Sun planet, but in the Federation, they were just a slightly stronger ant. To put it bluntly, the clan didn't have the ability to obtain the Frost Soul Source crystal. At first, the clan couldn't figure out the other party's intentions at all. They were just deliberately making things difficult for them. However, when the Frost Soul Source crystal appeared 10 days later, the high-ranking members of the clan felt a chill run down their spines. It was obvious that the other party had already known that the Frost Soul Source crystal would appear on the Scarlet Sun planet. That was why they had kidnapped the clan. What kind of person could know that the Frost Soul Source crystal would appear before it even appeared? This alone was enough to prove that the other party had a powerful background. He was no longer someone the clan could touch. After combining all these incidents, the clan felt like they were being targeted by a terrifying force. Anmonian completely gave up on any thoughts of resistance. Resistance was useless. Instead, it would only enrage the other party and doom the clan. In recent years, the clan had encountered one strange incident after another. It was almost non-stop. From Anmonian's illness to the entire core of the clan, Anping was crippled. Ansinuo originally had a 5-elemental spirit meridian, but for some reason, it became a normal spirit meridian, causing his talent to plummet. In reality, if they hadn't met a benefactor like Li Daochong on the Blue Bay Star, the clan might have collapsed a year ago. Now, they were being targeted by a terrifying force. Anmonian couldn't understand. The clan wasn't the only one on the Scarlet Sun planet. Why did the other party choose the clan? Later on, Anmonian discovered that the other party only controlled the clan. Given the other party's terrifying strength, it wouldn't be difficult for them to control the entire Scarlet Sun planet. Why did they have to make things so complicated? If they appeared to steal the Frost Soul Source crystal, who on the Scarlet Sun planet would be able to stop them? Just Old Gun and a few Gene Dan cultivators? Although Anmonian hadn't even seen the other party's shadow, he was certain that the other party could wipe out all the Gene Dan cultivators on the Scarlet Sun planet with a single finger. Anmonian even believed that even the Security Bureau couldn't do anything to the other party. However, the more terrifying the other party was, the more curious Anmonian was. Why didn't they come and take it themselves? It was simple, crude, and easy. However, such a terrifying existence had chosen the most complicated method. Anmonian wasn't a fool. He quickly realized that either the other party couldn't show themselves, or there was a reason why they couldn't do it themselves. The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. In one of Anmonian's conversations with Insinuo, his daughter had casually said, "Why are these people like ghosts?" The speaker didn't mean it, but the listener understood. Anmonian sucked in a breath of cold air. His daughter's words made him think of another possibility. This terrifying power came from the Hades. If that was true, then it was truly terrifying. For the clan, it would be a disaster that they couldn't resist at all. Anmonian didn't tell anyone about this, nor did he dare to. The only thing Emonian could do was to fight for the Frost Soul Source Crystal with everything he had and exchange it for his wife and a few elders. As for whether the other party would let them go or kill them to silence them, there was no point in considering it. The difference in power was too great. It was just like the difference between a mortal and a cultivator. Emonian used almost all the resources and power the clan could muster to finally hire the #1 expert on planet Crimson Sun, Old Gun, and Bai. With the support of these two Jin Dan cultivators, Emonian was determined to win. He felt that his chances of obtaining the Frost Soul Source Crystal were very high. That was what Emonian thought until about 10 minutes ago. However, when Old Gun admitted defeat, Emonian felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His heart almost stopped beating. Old Gun's admission of defeat was practically a death sentence for his wife. No, it should be said that it was a death sentence for the entire clan. Old Gun was supported by 2 Foundation establishment cultivators back to the clan's camp. His expression was extremely ugly, and his internal injuries were very serious. There was no way he could continue fighting. Only Bai was left on the clan's side. Senior Xiang, Emonian called out worriedly. Old Gun waved his hand and didn't say anything. He then sat down cross-legged, took out a few spirit pills, and swallowed them. He immediately began to recuperate. Senior Bai, what should we do now? Emonian grasped at his last straw of hope. Don't worry. Since I've already accepted the commission, I'll do my best to help the clan no matter what happens. Although Old Gun lost, Yijing too is also crippled. Even if he wins, he won't be able to fight again. Bai saw through Emonian's worries at a glance. In that case, Junior thanks Senior White. Emonian was afraid that Bai would leave or change sides when she saw that the situation was not good. If that really happened, the clan wouldn't be able to do anything to her. Hiring Jin Dan cultivators was an extremely risky thing to do. When he heard Bai's words, Emonian's mental defenses, which had almost collapsed, finally stabilized slightly. Chapter 407. Old Gun lost and Yijing 2-1. The 3 major clans each won 1 round and the family lost 1 round. In the second round, the loser would have a bye and the winner would fight with the rogue cultivators again. Just as Bai said, Yijing too could no longer fight. When Old Gun admitted defeat, his body was empty and he was very weak. The price of burning his blood essence was not only 30 years of his life, but it would also damage his inner foundation. It would take months for him to recover. Of course, Yijing too was not completely useless. He was more than enough to deal with cultivators below the Jin Dan level, but he could no longer fight with Jin Dan cultivators. According to the rules, Yijing too would not stay in the field. The 3 major clans sent out Shiman Jin, the ancestor of the Shiman family, for the second round. The rogue cultivators sent Chen Yuan, the Taoist master of Formless. Shiman Jin was at the early Jin Dan level. He was the last of the 3 ancestors to step into the Jin Dan level. He was much younger and weaker. However, the Shiman family had a set of techniques and a magic treasure that was passed down from the ancient times. It was said that they were ancient treasures passed down from the ancient times. The Shiman family used to be a superfamily in the ancient times and had produced several soul formation cultivators. However, they gradually declined as they developed. Only a set of techniques and a magic treasure were left. The technique was called the Forbidden Snow Technique, and the magic treasure was a flying snow sword that was less than 4 feet long. However, this seemingly ordinary sword could cut through iron like mud and cut through gold and stone. It was a superior grade mysterious spirit treasure. Combined with the Forbidden Snow Technique, the descendants of the Shiman family had always been better than their peers. Chen Yuan and Shiman Jin walked into the field and their auras exploded. The test had begun from the moment they stepped into the field. Chen Yuan was called the Taoist master of formless because the technique he cultivated was called the formless cloud hand. He was a Jin Dan body cultivator. Chen Yuan's magic treasure was a pair of gloves that could release hidden weapons. A short knife could be extended from the back of his hand. The outcome of the fight between the two could only be determined after the fight. Both of them were close combat cultivators and were not good at spells. As for supernatural powers, according to their past attacks, they did not seem to have any. Shimin Jin was the first to attack. The flying snow sword changed into a silver light and rushed towards Chen Yuan. The latter raised both of his hands, and that pair of silver-white gloves emitted a faint brilliance. This battle was extremely intense. The two of them went up to the sky and down to the ground. Their shadows were everywhere. However, the shock waves from their fight were far weaker than those of Old Gun and Yi Jingtu. Close combat paid more attention to details. Stability, accuracy, and ruthlessness were the key. One did not pursue lethality, and one's focus was only on one target. In the end, Chen Yuan was defeated in one move, and Shimin Jin was victorious. The rogue cultivators lost one round, while the three great clans won 2 rounds. This competition was developing in a more and more advantageous direction for the 3 great clans. In the 3rd round, the Yin family could only send Bai Yi, while the 3 families continued to fight. However, Shimin Jin was also exhausted. This time, the 3 great clans sent out the Dong family's ancestor, Dong Yuan. Dong Yuan was a Jin Dan cultivator on planet Crimson Sunday. He was ranked 3rd after Old Gun and Bai Yi. The Dong family was different from the Shimin family. They did not have a glorious past. In fact, the Dong family did not even exist hundreds of years ago. It was not until a Jin Dan cultivator appeared in Dong Yuan's previous generation that the Dong family gradually prospered and established the Dong family. When it came to Dong Yuan's generation, there were a few more talented people, and Dong Yuan was one of the best. Perhaps because they were new, the Dong family's method of training the next generation was extremely harsh. It could even be judged as unreasonable. At the age of 6, they had to survive in the wilderness for 3 days. If they survived, they would be trained by the family. If they did not survive, there would not even be anyone to collect their corpses. Therefore, the descendants of the Dong family were extremely valiant. Their cultivation was also the same. Whether it was mental cultivation techniques, or supernatural powers, they all pursued firmness and fierceness. The Dong family's fist technique, Dong family's saber technique, and blazing flame technique were all self-created by the previous generation of the Dong family. The Dong family's Dharma treasures and weapons were relatively simple. They were basically heavy weapons. Dong Yuan was the same. He could use a mountain-splitting axe to perfection. Bai Yi faced Dong Yuan with a hint of fear in her eyes. She had never fought with Dong Yuan before. Bai Yi had always been regarded as the second most powerful cultivator on planet Crimson Sun after Old Gun. Her white phoenix silk belt had many transformations and was illusory. Once it was used, there was no way to figure it out. Dong Yuan was ferocious. Bai Yi was ethereal. It was also difficult to determine who was stronger. Dong Yuan held the mountain-splitting axe in his hand. His tiger-like eyes shot out an aggressive brilliance. He looked at Bai Yi as if he wanted to devour her. Bai Yi's expression did not change much. Her white robe fluttered in the wind like a fairy. Her white phoenix silk belt was hidden in her sleeves, ready to attack at any time. Dong Yuan said in a deep voice, "Taoist Bai, I have long heard that your white phoenix silk belt is strange and unpredictable. I have long wanted to exchange pointers with Taoist Bai. Today I can consider my wish fulfilled." Bai Yi faintly smiled. "Fellow Taoist Dong, your mountain-splitting axe looks very frightening. In a moment, please show mercy and don't chop this little girl in half." When Dong Yuan heard this, he looked up and laughed. Taoist Bai, I have heard that other than your powerful cultivation technique, you are also very good at using women. Your soft words have a seductive tone. I have never believed it. Now, it seems that the rumors are true. Unfortunately, your little tricks are useless against me. Let's talk with our strength. Come on. With that, Dong Yuan raised the mountain-splitting axe in his hand and chopped it towards Bai. He did not have any intention of holding back. He could not wait to cut Bai in half. Many of the cultivators who were watching from afar had some sighs in their eyes. They seemed to be reluctant. Bai was a high and mighty fairy in the eyes of non-Jin Dan cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday. This Dong Yuan is really ruthless, someone said. Bai did not expect that her seductive words did not affect Dong Yuan at all. She could not help but feel a little regretful. Dong Yuan's axe was at least more than 10 meters away from Bai, but the axe light was more than 20 meters away. Bai retreated and leaped into the sky. Boom! The axe light chopped down, and a gully dozens of meters long and several meters deep appeared on the ground. If Bai was hit, she would not be able to withstand it. As Bai dodged, the white phoenix silk ribbon in her sleeve flew out like a wriggling white snake toward Dong Yuan. Dong Yuan's expression changed, and he grasped the huge axe in his hand horizontally. The white phoenix silk ribbon hit the surface of the axe with a muffled bang. Dong Yuan hurriedly retreated more than 10 steps. The power that the faintly discernible silk ribbon instantly exploded with was truly terrifying. Even a tough and fierce cultivator like Dong Yuan could not completely withstand it. Li Daochong was still standing there watching this duel, but there was a hint of weariness in his eyes. The strength of this group of Jin Dan cultivators was too mediocre. Apart from their higher cultivation levels, there was nothing special about them. Li Daochong felt that they were not even as good as those fellows who had passed the 100 schools joint entrance exam. He couldn't help but yawn. He stood there and closed his eyes to rest, using only his psychokinesis to probe. This battle lasted for a long time. The two sides were in a deadlock, and it took more than an hour for the victor to be decided. Dong Yuan used the 8th level of the Dong family's consummate skill, the Inferno technique, raging flames burning the heavens. When the axe fell, it really seemed as if it could destroy heaven and earth. The blazing axe light soared hundreds of meters into the sky, and the raging flames seemed as if they wanted to burn the sky. This was already beyond the scope of a cultivation technique, and had reached the level of a low-level divine ability. In fact, the Inferno technique was a low-level divine ability that went from shallow to deep, and belonged to the beginner level. Bai's white phoenix silk ribbon danced in the air, dazzling the cultivators who were watching. It seemed as if heaven and earth were about to be filled. Chapter 408. Dong Yuan's axe came crashing down like a volcanic eruption, its power terrifying. Bai's white phoenix silk ribbon covered the sky, forming a massive ribbon net that covered an area of several hundred meters. The white phoenix silk ribbon transformed into a white phoenix phantom. The white phoenix was one of the 10 mythological beasts of ancient times. Now, this kind of godlike spirit world creature was nearly extinct. There was no white phoenix in the Shenghua Federation. Even though it was only a very weak white phoenix phantom, it still brought about a massive visual impact to the cultivators watching from afar, as well as a subtle sense of worship. The white phoenix was once the totem god of the ancient Phoenix clan. Even Soul Formation Supreme Elders had to bow their heads in front of the white phoenix. The white phoenix phantom was only a dozen meters long, but it had a wingspan of over 20 meters. It let out a long cry as it rushed toward Dong Yuan. The raging flames instantly burned the massive white ribbon net. Bai felt a pang of pain with every piece that was burned away. This white phoenix silk ribbon was something that she had spent 60 years to collect and refine. Now, half of it had been burned away by the raging flames. Bai's eyes flashed with anger, and the white phoenix phantom became even more solid. Dong Yuan's axe came crashing down. He thought that he would be able to incinerate the white ribbon net and cleave at Bai Yi, but he didn't expect that such a powerful flame would be unable to penetrate the white phoenix silk ribbon net. It didn't even touch Bai Yi. He saw the white phoenix phantom hurtling toward him. Dong Yuan was horrified. He raised his axe to block, but the white phoenix phantom was useless against it. The white phoenix passed through Dong Yuan. This Jin Dan cultivator only saw a flash before his eyes, and then he entered a fantastical and ethereal world. Two white phoenixes danced in the air, surrounded by birds and fragrant flowers. It was like a fairyland. However, this scene only lasted for a moment. When Dong Yuan returned to reality, he felt as if his body had been hollowed out. The white phoenix phantom passed through Dong Yuan, taking away all of his spiritual energy. Dong Yuan's entire body was dispirited, and he gasped for breath. He felt as if he had fought for 3 days and 3 nights without rest. His legs were weak, and his entire body was sore and uncomfortable. It was almost like a mortal running a marathon. Dong Yuan couldn't hold the axe in his hand, and it fell to the ground. He wanted to stand up, but he couldn't, and he knelt on one knee. After the white phoenix phantom flew past Dong Yuan, not only did it not disappear, but the phantom looked even more solid. Bai Feng flew up high in the air and spun around before charging towards Bai Yi. Many of the spectating cultivators were stunned. Was Bai Yi going to attack them with this move? Li Daochong, who had his eyes closed all this time, also narrowed his eyes. This was the first time he had seen such a move. When Bai Yi and Li Daochong dealt with the Ghost King in the grotto, she did not use such a trick. It seemed that this woman did not use her full strength at that time. Li Daochong's lips moved slightly. He had underestimated her. Seeing that Bai Feng was about to rush back and pass through Bai Yi, some of the cultivators exclaimed in surprise. A few of the Jin Dan cultivators were also shocked. They didn't know what was going on with Bai Yi's move. It seemed that no one present had seen Bai Yi use this move before. Dong Yuan, who thought that he had lost, suddenly saw a sliver of hope that the battle would end in a draw. It seemed that Bai Yi was not familiar with this move, which resulted in the backlash. Otherwise, why would she charge back? Just as everyone was surprised, Bai Feng charged into Bai Yi's body. It disappeared in an instant. It did not pass through Dong Yuan's body as everyone had expected. Bai Feng seemed to have disappeared into Bai Yi's body. In that instant, Bai Yi's weakened aura suddenly surged, and she recovered to her peak condition. Bai Yi waved her sleeve, and the remaining half of the white phoenix silk ribbon quickly disappeared into her sleeve. Bai Yi slowly descended from the void. She looked like a woman from the mortal world, and her body emitted a faint white glow. Dong Yuan was dumbfounded. His face was ashen, and he had no choice but to admit defeat. After winning 2 consecutive battles, the 3 great clans finally lost for the 3rd time. Bai Yi defeated Dong Yuan. Not only did she defeat the latter, she did not even consume any energy. Her last move was shocking. At this moment, the Jin Dan cultivators present realized that Bai Yi's last move was a sacred art and not a cultivation technique. Bai Yi's strength was terrifying. At this moment, the cultivators of the Scarlet Sun planet experienced it for themselves. The 3 great experts of the Scarlet Sun planet were not randomly ranked. Old Gun, Bai Yi, and Lu Xingzhan. These 3 were recognized as the 3 great experts of the Scarlet Sun planet for the past 20 years. However, very few people had seen them in action. Not many people knew how powerful these 3 were. Lu Xingzhan had already fallen more than 2 months ago. The remaining 2, Old Gun and Bai Yi, had displayed their skills in front of so many cultivators for the first time. They did not disgrace the name of the 3 great experts. Although Old Gun had lost, it was a glorious defeat. Yi Jingtu's victory was not very convincing. Everyone knew the price of burning one's blood essence. Old Gun did not put his life on the line. If he did, Yi Jingtu might not be able to obtain the final victory even if he burned his blood essence. Bai Yi and Dong Yuan's battle seemed to be evenly matched. However, in reality, Bai Yi had done it on purpose. After figuring out Dong Yuan's moves, she used one move and won with an overwhelming advantage. The 5 Jin Dan cultivators on the side of the itinerant cultivators were shocked. Bai Yi's last move was flawless. How could they break it? No matter how much energy Bai Yi expended, she could use this magical power to recover instantly. In a way, Bai Yi's strength was even more terrifying than Old Gun's. She was like an unkillable cockroach. After Bai Yi's victory, the dejected and family members immediately became spirited. And Monian saw hope again. He did not expect this white fairy to have such a heaven-defying magical power. The 3 great families, who had been in high spirits just a moment ago, suddenly became nervous. Although Yi Jingtu had won, he could not fight again. Dong Yuan had lost and could not fight again. In fact, even if he could fight again, he would not be able to fight again. His body had been hollowed out and he was extremely weak. Even with the best recovery elixirs, he would need 1 or 2 days to fully recover. It was impossible for him to recover in less than 10 minutes unless he had a heaven-defying magical power like Bai Yi's. Li Daochong's eyes shone with interest. Bai Yi's magical power was much more advanced than the previous ones. In terms of effect, it was even more powerful than Li Daochong's immature heavenly thunder spell, Eye of Thunder Punishment. Bai Yi stayed in the field, and Dong Yuan was helped off the field. The itinerant cultivators looked at each other, but no one wanted to fight immediately. In the end, Zhou Rong, the wandering fairy, saw that the other 3 were silent, and a hint of contempt appeared in her phoenix-like eyes. When Wang Qianxi first came to recruit Zhou Rong, he bragged that he was so powerful that even Old Gun was no match for him. As the leader of the itinerant cultivators, Wang Qianxi did not even dare to fart when he took the initiative to ask for a fight. His small eyes even seemed to show timidity. Lu Jingtian, the Kongming immortal, was a very cautious person. Although he did not seem to be afraid at this moment, he did not want to fight. Chun Yuan, the faceless immortal, had been defeated and could not fight. Zhang Shou, the old man of Jin Dan, was recognized as the most powerful one among the 5. However, at this moment, his old eyes were wandering, and no one knew what he was thinking. His mind was not here at all. Fine, fine. If you all don't want to fight, then I will. Zhou Rong's eyes lit up, and then she said, "Let me fight this round." As soon as Zhou Rong finished her words, Wang Qianxi immediately laughed. "Wandering fairy, thank you for your hard work. You don't have to fight Bai Yi head-on. It doesn't matter if you can't defeat her. As long as you can prevent Bai Yi's Reiki from being absorbed by her white phoenix, it will be enough." Wang Qianxi's words were very clear. Zhou Rong, it was absolutely impossible for you to defeat Bai Yi. What you had to do was to pay attention to her white phoenix. As long as the white phoenix went through your body, it didn't matter even if you lost. You just had to try your best to exhaust Bai Yi. The other 3 people, Chun Yuan, Lu Jingtian, and the old man of Kongzhu all thought the same. Chapter 409. No one was optimistic about Zhou Rong's performance. It was no different from giving away food for free. Among the 12 Jin Dan cultivators present, Zhou Rong was the last one to enter the Jin Dan stage, and it had only been a month. Perhaps there was still Li Daochong, who had only been here for a few days. Bai Yi stared at Zhou Rong, who was walking into the arena, with a bit of interest in her eyes. She was somewhat curious about this female cultivator, who had just entered the Jin Dan stage on planet Qiyang. "Fairy Bai Yi, I'm sorry to offend you." Zhou Rong was neither servile nor overbearing as she looked at Bai Yi. Bai Yi nodded slightly. There was not much confrontation between the 2 female cultivators. After Zhou Rong finished her sentence very politely, she stretched out her white jade-like hand, and two petal-like powder gold dart-like objects appeared in her palm. The petals fall and drift, falling with the wind, silently returning to the earth. Zhou Rong's mouth uttered a rather poetic recitation. The two petal darts in her palm spiraled up, and then as if they were splitting, more and more petal darts danced and flew up. Zhou Rong was surrounded by petals. At this moment it did not look like a battle between Jin Dan cultivators, but more like the autumn wind blowing, with the fragrance of flowers drifting and the petals flying with the wind. The word beautiful was enough to describe her. However, just as everyone was enjoying these beautiful petals, suddenly, among the hundreds of petals, a petal shot out with a swoosh. Bai's eyes narrowed, and she actually felt a sense of crisis. Compared to Dong Yuan's unstoppable axe, the threat was much greater. The white phoenix silk ribbon came out of her sleeve, and with a bang it collided with the petal, erupting with a dull sound. The place where the white phoenix silk ribbon collided with the petal was torn apart. Bai was shocked. The seemingly weak petal was actually so powerful. Zhou Rong's attack had just begun. The petals in the sky had no pattern, as if they had entered a world of flowers. However, each of these beautiful petals contained a terrifying lethality, and could easily kill a foundation establishment cultivator on the spot. Bai did not dare to be careless. The white phoenix silk ribbon circled around her, forming a 360-degree spiral wall with no blind spots. From afar it looked like a white tornado. The moves of the two female cultivators were pleasing to the eye, unlike the simple and crude moves of the male cultivators. There was no beauty to speak of, only power. The moves of female cultivators were much more particular. Perhaps this was the nature of women. No matter what they did, they had to pay attention to beauty. The drifting flower petals danced faster and faster, as if there was a gust of wind stirring them. They silently shot towards Bai. The petals collided with the white ribbon, producing an ear-piercing sound of friction and sparks flying in all directions. When these two pleasing moves collided with each other, one would discover how terrifying the killing intent hidden behind the beauty was. No one had expected Zhou Rong to be so strong. Bai could only defend and was unable to attack. The drifting petals formed an indiscriminate attack zone that was simply unbreakable. One attacked and the other defended. The deadlock lasted for several minutes. Neither of them could do anything to the other. The white ribbon was nibbled away bit by bit, and the number of petals was also decreasing. Many of them fell to the ground, their shapes changing. Under the high temperature produced by the friction, they were charred black. Bai stood in the middle of the white ribbon. Her gentle face revealed a hint of anger. She was actually being suppressed by a little girl who had just entered the Jin Dan stage. Bang! Suddenly, with a muffled sound, the white ribbon exploded, and the drifting flower petals array was shattered. A white shadow shot out from it. A white ribbon shot towards Zhou Rong like lightning. Zhou Rong was shocked. That white shadow was so fast that it had already exceeded the limit of her ability to dodge. There was no time for her to react. Zhou Rong shook her hand and a huge petal appeared. Boom! The white ribbon collided with the huge petal, producing a loud sound. The huge petal was completely deformed. Zhou Rong was sent flying several hundred meters away. That white shadow was Bai. When she appeared, Bai looked somewhat unstable. Although this attack was powerful enough to send Zhou Rong flying, Bai had also expended a lot of energy. Several hundred meters away, a pinkish gold flower appeared in Zhou Rong's hand. She tossed it lightly and the flower spun out. In the void, the flower grew rapidly. In almost an instant, it became a huge flower with a diameter of more than 2 meters. Red spider lily's sole attraction. Zhou Rong's red lips opened slightly as she murmured. In the distant crowd, Li Daocheng's eyes suddenly opened. He saw the pinkish gold flower. He actually felt a trace of familiarity. The pinkish gold flower contained an extremely dense aura of death. It was the aura of death from the Hades. Li Daocheng's gaze towards Zhou Rong changed. This unfamiliar girl had secret. She seemed to be able to absorb dead souls. The spectating cultivators all gasped. The surrounding temperature suddenly dropped. The previous battle had raised the temperature of the area by a lot. The cold aura emitted by the chill soul origin crystal had already been offset. However, the cold aura gained the upper hand at this moment. Moreover, it made people shudder. It was as if they saw the sea of the netherworld and the blooming red spider lily on the other side. Taoist Wang, we underestimated Fairy Zhou. Her strength is much more terrifying than we imagined. I'm afraid even I have no chance of winning against her. Old Man Green Bamboo, Zhang Shou, sighed. His old eyes revealed a deep sense of fear. Wang Qianxi's face twitched. In his eyes, Zhou Rong was the weakest of the 5 Jin Dan itinerant cultivators. She was just cannon fodder. He did not expect Zhou Rong to be so strong. So strong that it was a little abnormal. When the flower appeared, the area within a radius of a few kilometers was no longer the human world, but the Hades. On the side of the 3 major clans, the 5 Jin Dan cultivators were shocked. Yi Jingtu frowned. Zhou Rong is a ghost cultivator? Dong Yuan shook his head. No, Zhou Rong does not have any aura of death on her. It's only on that flower. It's a superior grade mysterious spirit treasure. Shiman Jin was stunned. Could it be a Dharma treasure of the Hades? Dong Yuan shook his head again. It's not a Dharma treasure. It's a spirit treasure. However, the weapon spirit is not from the spiritual realm, but a Yin spirit. Shiman Jin's expression changed. I see. This Zhou Rong is not simple. Yi Jingtu's face was a little gloomy. Bai Yi was already very difficult to deal with, and now Zhou Rong had appeared out of nowhere. The 3 major clans had no other trump cards left. He and Dong Yuan were their strongest trump cards, and they had already gone out. The remaining Shiman Jin did not have much fighting power. Even if he won one match, his opponent was not worth mentioning. Against Bai Yi and Zhou Rong, Shiman Jin had no chance of winning. In this fight, whether it was Bai Yi or Zhou Rong, no matter who won, no one would be their opponent in the following fights. The 3 major clans had only won 2 matches. If Bai Yi defeated Zhou Rong, the Yin clan would also win 2 matches. The remaining 3 people on the itinerant cultivators' side were nothing to be afraid of. Bai Yi could continue to win. If Zhou Rong won, the itinerant cultivators' side would have 4 people who could still fight. Whether it was in terms of numbers or strength, they would be able to suppress everyone. Fellow Taoist Dong, we have to take out our final trump card, Yi Jingtu said in a deep voice. Dong Yuan's expression changed, and he said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Yi, you have to think carefully. That trump card is not easy to control. If it goes out of control, even we will suffer. Yi Jingtu's eyes revealed a bit of ruthlessness. Fellow Taoist Dong, how can a person who wants to achieve great things without the spirit of adventure? As long as we get the Frost Soul Source Crystal and auction it at the Black Prison, the resources we can exchange for will be enough for us to cultivate for several decades. Advancing to the middle stage of Jin Dan will not be a problem. The Frost Soul Source Crystal appearing on planet Crimson Sun is a blessing from the heavens. If we miss this opportunity, we won't get another one. If we miss this opportunity, I'm afraid we will be stuck at the early stage of Jin Dan until we die. Dong Yuan's originally hesitant expression disappeared after hearing Yi Jingtu's words. It was replaced by a resolute expression. Fellow Taoist Yi is right. We can't miss such a great opportunity. Alright, let's use our trump card, Dong Yuan said while gritting his teeth. Fellow Taoist Dong, when the match comes to an end, you and I will open the receiving realm gate together and release the Minotaurs, Yi Jingtu replied. The Minotaurs and Horsemen were powerful existences among the ghost beasts of the Hades. The Minotaurs were formed by the Demon Ox clan of the demon race that had been contaminated by death energy, while the Horsemen were formed by the Demon Pegasus clan of the demon race that had been infected by death energy. Chapter 410. The pinkish gold-red spider lily had flowers but no leaf. As the flower rotated, it emitted a bewitching brilliance. Anyone who saw it would be completely captivated, unable to look away. The cultivators who were watching from afar were also captivated. Their eyes were filled with bewilderment. Many of the weaker cultivators even began to walk toward the red spider lilies unconsciously. Bai's divine will condensed to resist the attraction of the red spider lily. However, her body seemed to be enveloped by an invisible force field, unable to move. Bai's eyes flashed with shock. This Zhou was actually so strong. Her strength was far beyond that of an ordinary Jin Dan initial stage cultivator. The red spider lily's speed was not fast, but there was no way to avoid it. Seeing that the red spider lily was about to fly over, the flower rotated faster and faster. The petals were opening, and a black cloud was swirling around the stamen. Bai bit the tip of her tongue, forcing herself to stay awake and not fall into the red spider lily's soul-attracting brilliance. Bai's spirit chi surged out violently. White Phoenix Lai. A shadow flashed behind Bai. The white phoenix let out a long cry and flew towards the red spider lily. This scene made Yijingtu, who was standing 100 meters away, clench his fists. The corner of his eyes twitched. The best outcome was for both sides to suffer. The red spider lily and the white phoenix collided in the void. There was no earth-shattering sound, nor was there any violent collision. The white phoenix and the red spider lily merged together in the void. Slowly, the white phoenix's shadow became fainter and fainter. The bewitching brilliance emitted by the red spider lily also dimmed. The two great supernatural powers intertwined and nibbled at each other. They were evenly matched. A draw? Just when everyone thought that Bai and Zhou would end in a draw, the situation changed. The bewitching brilliance of the red spider lily disappeared. The black cloud in the stamen spread out and swallowed the white phoenix, which was about to disappear. Bai spat out a mouthful of blood and fell from the sky. She stared at Zhou and clutched her chest. She seemed unwilling but helpless. "I've lost." Zhou gently clenched her slender hand, and the red spider lily rapidly shrank. The black cloud was instantly sucked into the flower's pistil and disappeared. The rogue cultivators won this round. The crowd was in an uproar. Zhou won, and it wasn't a difficult victory. Bai was completely suppressed when she was in her peak state. Wouldn't Zhou strength be comparable to a Jin Dan middle stage cultivator? The Scarlet Sun Star now had another true expert. The position left by Lu Xingzhan's death had been filled by someone else. Yijingtu had been spying on the location of the three great experts. Originally, it should have been him. However, Zhou sudden appearance completely shattered Yijingtu's beautiful dream. Zhou landed in the middle of the field and stared at them. There was not much emotion on her delicate face. However, if one's divine sense was strong enough, one would be able to sense the slight instability in Zhou psyche power. It wasn't because Zhou was injured, but because she was excited. Even she didn't expect to defeat Bai. Now that she knew her strength had reached such a level, it would be difficult for anyone to remain calm. Li Daochong, who was wearing a conical bamboo hat, rubbed his chin. This female cultivator was a little interesting. That pink-red spider lily didn't seem very powerful, but it was actually very mysterious. Even Li Daochong would be flustered if he faced it. However, now that he had seen it for himself, he had a better idea. Divine powers could only be countered with divine powers. There was no other way. The Eye of Lightning punishment was the only technique Li Daochong had that could resist this move. Whether he could defeat it was still a question mark. However, Yang Lightning was innately effective against all things of the netherworld. The red spider lily contained a strong aura of death, and the black cloud was its greatest mystery. Li Daochong felt that his chances of winning were still relatively high. Zhou Rong's victory boosted the morale of the rogue cultivators, who had been in low spirits. They all held their heads high and puffed out their chests. On the other hand, the Yin family's side was the opposite. And Monian sat down on a stone chair, his eyes blank and at a loss. Bai Yi had been defeated, and Old Pao had also been defeated. The Yin family only had one spot left, and there was no one else. Old Gun had internal injuries and couldn't continue fighting. Bai Yi's injuries weren't light either. There seemed to be a strange aura of death in her body. Who was going to fight? And Monian's heart was dead. The heavens wanted the Yin family dead. And Sinuo saw that Monian was in a very bad state. "Father, are you okay?" And Monian waved his hand. Endless grief appeared on his old face. He lowered his head, unwilling to let his daughter see it. And Ding Bang gave Sinuo a look and said telepathically, "Sinuo, let father be quiet for a while." And Sinuo's eyes were filled with tears. "But who's going to fight later?" "I just asked Senior Bai. She said she can't continue fighting." And Ding Bang's expression was desolate. He replied in a low voice, "Then just admit defeat." And Sinuo was unwilling. "But we still have one more chance. Are we going to waste it just like that?" And Ding Bang smiled bitterly. "What do you want if we don't waste it? Who's going? You, me, or someone else? Do you want to embarrass yourself?" And Monian sighed. "Sinuo, get ready. We're going home." And Sinuo was anxious. "Father, if we go back like this, how are we going to explain it to the people who kidnapped Mother?" And Monian was silent for a moment. "Let's leave it to fate." The siblings looked at each other, their expressions bleak. The Yin family, one of the 4 great families of planet Crimson Sun, was actually going to resign to fate. The 5th match was between the 3 great families and the independent cultivators. Zhou Rong didn't enter the arena. Her intention was clear. She didn't expend much energy fighting Bai Yi just now. The representative of the 3 great families was a Jin Dan cultivator hired by the Dong family. This person looked a little wretched. He had a mustache and a flag on his back. He looked like a fortune teller. He was called by Shirtong and entered the arena with his mustache. He didn't seem to be afraid of Zhou Rong, but his small eyes kept darting around. His heart was pounding, and he wanted nothing more than to admit defeat. Bai Shirtong was different from the other independent cultivators. He didn't rely on his strength to get to where he was today, but his mouth. Selling his mouth was his strength. When it came to fighting, he could bully the weak, but when faced with a strong opponent, he was more cowardly than anyone else. His life was more precious than gold. Bai Shirtong had already thought of a countermeasure. They had to fight, but it was just a formality. It was impossible for him to risk his life. Bai Shirtong took out the flag on his back and stuck it into the ground. He silently recited the incantation. A strong wind blew around them, and the flag danced in the wind. The image of a dragon seemed to appear, but it was very ethereal. His aura was indescribable. When Zhou Rong saw this, she poured out more petals than when she fought Bai Yi. However, the moment Zhou Rong made her move, the flag flew over. Several petals flew out. Whoosh whoosh. The sound of the petals breaking through the air was ear-piercing. Bai Shirtong was so scared that his balls shrank. He almost screamed. Fortunately, he controlled himself in time and raised a silver shield. Bam! Bai Shirtong flew backward and spat out a mouthful of blood. When he landed, he admitted defeat without hesitation. The flag didn't attack Zhou Rong. Instead, it circled around and returned to Bai Shirtong's back. This battle was very boring. The other Jin Dan cultivators from the 3 major clans could see that Bai Shirtong was just being perfunctory. However, it was a fact that he was injured, so they couldn't say anything. Yu Jingtu looked coldly at Bai Shirtong, who was walking down the arena. The latter didn't seem to notice and even smiled at Yijingtu. His skin was unusually thick. The independent cultivators won another round. The sixth round was the clan's turn again. Although Yijingtu was very unhappy with Zhou Rong's sudden appearance, he felt a little comforted when he saw that the clan had completely withdrawn from the competition. Zhou Rong was still standing in the arena, waiting for her next opponent. There was no movement from the clan's side. Old Gun and Bai Yi had both been defeated. Who else dared to go up? The cultivators who were hired had long retreated. The cultivators who were still standing beside the clan were either on good terms with them or had been with them for a long time. However, there were only a few of them. The others had all retreated several li away. When Yijingtu saw that there was no response from the clan, he added, "Anmanian, your clan still has one more participant. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and send someone to fight." Chapter 411. In reality, Yijingtu's plan had already achieved its goal. From the very beginning, his goal was to eliminate the family first. However, things did not go according to Yijingtu's plan, but the family's goal of being eliminated was still achieved. Next, they just had to find a way to get rid of Zhou Rong. Then, the three great clans could rightfully claim the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. All these years, the family had developed rapidly under Anmonian's management. Without the help of a Jin Dan cultivator, the family's business had reached its peak. Although the three great clans were enemies with the family, they could not help but admire Anmonian's business acumen. However, this admiration was mostly built on anger. The family had snatched away a few of the Yi family's big business deals 2 years ago. Yijingtu had always been brooding over this. After suffering so much from the family, it would be strange if he did not hate them. The three great clans could not wait for the family to suffer. The sooner they fell, the better. As soon as Yijingtu finished speaking, Dong Yuan added, "Anmanian, since there's no one left in the family, why don't you admit defeat? It'll save everyone some time." Anmanian lowered his head and sighed. He knew that there was nothing to say. Just as he was about to admit defeat, a calm voice came from behind him. "Who said there's no one left? There are so many people here. Are you blind?" As soon as these words were spoken, the surrounding cultivators gasped. They all looked in the direction of the voice and saw that half of the Straw Hat cultivator's face was hidden under the straw hat. Only his chin and mouth could be seen. The Straw Hat cultivator even had a piece of straw in his mouth. This kid just offended Yijingtu not long ago. Now, he's overestimating himself and speaking rudely to Dong Yuan. What's going on in his head? Someone could not understand. Why do you care so much? This guy is probably tired of living. Those who knew the Straw Hat cultivator all looked suspicious. "Su Mao, did you take the wrong medicine today?" An old man standing beside Anmanian said in a low voice. The old man's voice carried a telekinesis attack. However, it did not have any killing power. It only had the effect of waking one up. Anmanian had noticed the Straw Hat cultivator earlier, but he had forgotten about him due to his heavy heart. Now, he was looking at the Straw Hat cultivator with a hint of anger. "Right now, the clan is already in dire straits, yet you're still boasting like the world isn't in chaos. Isn't this clearly trying to embarrass the clan?" Yijingtu glanced at the Straw Hat cultivator from the corner of his eyes and sneered. "I haven't settled the score with you yet, but you brat came out on your own. One might be able to survive a heavenly calamity, but one cannot survive a self-inflicted calamity. Since you're courting death, you can't blame anyone else. Impudent!" Yijingtu suddenly snorted coldly and rebuked angrily. A wave of pressure swept across the sky, causing the expressions of the surrounding cultivators to tighten. In his battle with Old Gun, Yijingtu had burned his blood essence and consumed so much of his energy. Yet, He was still able to release such a powerful pressure at this moment, as expected of a Jean Dan cultivator. Who are you calling blind? How can a junior speak to a senior without any manners? Why would the clan hire a lowly cultivator like you? Yijing continued. Senior Yi, please forgive this servant of mine for being immature. I'll definitely discipline him when we get back, the old man standing behind Anmanian hurriedly said. Humph, how you discipline him when you get back is your own business. You don't have to tell me. Since this brat is so arrogant, why don't you let him fight? Your clan will be the last to fight. Yijing didn't buy it. Although the Straw Hat cultivator's words were a little harsh, he was still a member of the clan. Whether they fought or not was up to the clan. As the head of the family, Anmanian couldn't allow the clan to be manipulated no matter how cold his heart was. Even if the other party was a Jean Dan cultivator, Anmonian's cultivation level might not be high, and his talent in cultivation was limited, but other than that, he was definitely a qualified family head. In fact, he was even more qualified than those family heads who only knew how to cultivate. As long as Anmonian was around, he would never allow outsiders to order the clan around, nor would he watch as the family's cultivators died for nothing. Fights between Jean Dan cultivators could be stopped when appropriate. An early-stage foundation establishment cultivator could easily take their lives. Even if they didn't die, their cultivation level would be crippled. Although Anmanian was also very angry at the Straw Hat cultivator's recklessness, Su Mao had been cautious and conscientious ever since he joined the clan. He had done many things for the clan, and even if he didn't make any contributions, he still worked hard. Even if he had to be punished, it was the clan's business. It had nothing to do with anyone else. Protecting his own was Anmonian's usual style. It was precisely because of Anmonian's conciliatory attitude that the family was able to remain united even without a golden core cultivator holding down the fort. Brother Yi, the clan won't fight this round. We admit defeat and withdraw from the fight. You can continue. The clan will leave now, Anmonian said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. Yijing eyes narrowed. The clan can admit defeat and leave, but that guy in the straw hat must stay. Brother Dong is a Jean Dan cultivator. How can we just let it go when a junior called him blind? Anmonian, don't you know that Jean Dan cultivators are not to be humiliated? If we let it go today, how can Brother Dong still have the face to stand on planet Crimson Sun in the future? What does the clan take Jean Dan cultivators for? Yijing tone was firm. Jean Dan cultivators were not to be humiliated. This had always been a tradition in the cultivation world. Strictly speaking, it wasn't that Jean Dan cultivators were not to be humiliated, but that high-ranking cultivators were not to be humiliated. In other words, this was the unspoken rule of a world where the strong preyed on the weak. There was only one outcome for a rabbit that argued with a wolf: it would become the wolf's food. This rule had never changed in the cultivation world since ancient times. It was just that the way it was expressed was different. After the arrival of the Great Cultivation Era, the relationship between cultivators became much more relaxed. It was not like the Cultivation Era in the Wild Antiquity Era, where a single disrespectful look could lead to death. However, this did not mean that one could be unbridled and disrespectful to high-ranking cultivators. If there was a price to be paid. Sometimes it was even the price of one's life. Otherwise, where would the dignity of high-ranking cultivators be? All the cultivators understood Yi Jingtu's words. It had been this way for tens of thousands of years. This was an unchanging law that was deeply rooted in the hearts of cultivators. In fact, it was the same even in the mortal world. There were no exceptions for any race or group, including the Dark Ghost. Senior Yi is right, a cultivator agreed. Who does this straw hat cultivator think he is? He speaks without thinking. How dare he speak so rudely to a Jean Dan cultivator? He should be taught a lesson. That's right. We have to let him fight. If he wants to have the right to speak, he has to show us his strength first. Many cultivators joined in the commotion. Anmanian wanted to protect him, but he had no reason to do so. He did not expect Yijingtu to be so serious. Anmonian's expression darkened. If the infamily was not so troublesome, perhaps he would protect Su Mao at all costs. However, he did not have that much energy now. Anmanian turned to Insinuo and said, Sinuo, go and give Su Mao 20,000 spirit stones as severance. The infamily can't protect him this time. Tell him to take care of himself. And Sinuo looked at his father's lonely face and nodded slightly. He turned and handed a storage bag to the straw hat cultivator. Su Mao, this is your severance. From now on, you have nothing to do with the infamily. I told you to take care of yourself. What's wrong with you today? Why do you keep saying that I want to protect you all of a sudden? Su Mao was Insinuo's bodyguard every time he went out. He even saved Insinuo's life once. Insinuo had some feelings for this cultivator hired by the infamily. She could not help but say a few more words as she handed over the severance. However, before she could finish her sentence, her delicate little face instantly froze. Her eyes widened and her mouth gaped open. She froze on the spot. When the straw hat cultivator took the storage bag, the face hidden under the straw hat slowly looked up, revealing the smiling face underneath. And Sinuo could not be more familiar with this face. However, she did not expect this man to appear here at this moment. And Sinuo's brain circuit completely shut off for at least 2 seconds. When she came back to her senses, she was even more nervous. Mr. Li, is that you? And Sinuo exclaimed. At the same time, an indescribable worry flashed across her eyes. Li Daochong had already set up a telekinesis barrier. Even the Jin Dan cultivators could not penetrate it. Therefore, no one noticed Insinuo's actions. Li Daochong nodded slightly and put away the storage bag. He smiled and said, "Long time no see." And Sinuo grabbed Li Daochong's hand and quickly ran to Anmonian. She leaned close to Anmonian's ear and said, "Dad, it's Mr. Li." "What?" Anmonian was stunned. He could not react in time. However, when he turned around and saw the face under the straw hat, he immediately stood up. "Mr. Li, why are you here?" Li Daochong said simply, "I heard that the Frost Soul Origin Crystal has appeared, so I came to take a look." Anmonian nodded and turned around. He looked at Yi Jingtu and said bluntly, "Brother Yi, I apologize to Brother Dong as the head of the infamily. Tomorrow, the infamily will send 100,000 spirit stones to Brother Dong as an apology." Anmonian's words came so suddenly that Li Daochong did not expect it either. If it were just cultivators from the infamily, Anmonian would have already given up. However, Li Daochong was different. He was his savior. Anmonian could not allow Li Daochong to be in danger no matter what. The infamily was only able to survive until now because of this savior. Now that his savior was being forced to fight against a cultivator from Jindan, how could he, Anmonian, still be considered a human being if he did nothing? 100,000 spirit stones? Anmonian, are you trying to dismiss a beggar? Yi Jingtu said coldly. Brother Yi, let Brother Dong name a price then. Anmonian gritted his teeth. 10 million spirit stones, Dong Yuan immediately said. Gasp! Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Every cultivator who heard this number was shocked. 10 million spirit stones? Even if it was only elementary spirit stones, it was still a huge sum of money. It was a huge sum even for cultivators. Brother Dong, isn't this price a little too much? Anmonian was a little anxious. Anmonian, 10 million spirit stones is already very polite. Jin Dan is not to be humiliated. Do you think it's just empty words? Brother Dong is already being merciful by not killing him on the spot. If this were the ancient era of cultivation, not only would this brat have died, but the entire An family would also be buried with him. Yi Jingtu's expression was vicious. Chapter 412. What do you mean? Anmanian, the patriarch wants your An family to scram as far away as possible. If you continue to protect this straw hat brat, don't blame us for being impolite. The patriarch of the Yi family, Yi Xiao, said harshly. Anmanian was so angry that his body trembled slightly. He didn't expect the Yi family to fall out with him in public. Yi Xiao, is your Yi family going to attack our An family? Anmanian asked in a low voice. The An family's current situation wasn't good, but the outside world didn't know about it. Even if the other three major families worked together, they wouldn't dare to do anything to the An family, let alone the Yi family. Anmanian was confident about this. The An family's business covered planet Crimson Sun and even had partners on planet Kangwu. Although their business wasn't big, they still had some dealings with second-class cultivation planet. The forces on the Scarlet Sun planet didn't have the ability to make a move on the An family without alerting anyone. They didn't dare to either. Anmanian looked at Yi Xiao coldly and didn't back down. Even if the An family didn't have a Jin Dan cultivator, he wasn't afraid. Yi Xiao's expression froze. He didn't expect Anmanian to be so protective of a cultivator with a different surname. Yi Xiao didn't know how to respond to Anmanian's words. Although he was the patriarch of the Yi family, he didn't have as much power as Anmanian did in the An family. Yi Xiao had to look at the patriarch, Yi Jingtu's expression. Just as Yi Xiao looked at Yi Jingtu, the latter's aura exploded violently. He flew up and appeared in front of Anmanian in an instant. Anmanian was stunned. He would be lying if he said he wasn't afraid. Yi Jingtu was a Jin Dan cultivator after all. Although he was afraid, Anmanian didn't show it. He met Yi Jingtu's gaze with his chi-gathering realm cultivation. Yi Jingtu smiled contemptuously. Spiritual energy surged around him, and Anmanian was sent flying. If the old man hadn't protected him, Anmanian would have been sent flying over 100 meters away and fell flat on his face. Sinuo and Ndingbang, who were nearby, were also sent flying by Yi Jingtu's aura. In the blink of an eye, only Yi Jingtu and the straw hat cultivator were left fighting. Yi Jingtu's aura did not manage to push the straw hat cultivator away, but that was not strange. After all, the straw hat cultivator was a foundation establishment cultivator. Yi Jingtu had expended a lot of energy in his battle with Old Gun. It was unrealistic for him to push a foundation establishment cultivator away with just his aura. Yi Jingtu was almost 2 meters tall. Those with the black tortoise bloodline were mostly burly. They looked down at the grass hat cultivator with murderous intent in their eyes. From the moment this fellow spoiled his plan, Yi Jingtu had already harbored the intention to kill him. He was just worried that he wouldn't have an excuse to make a move. Now that this fellow had dug a hole for himself, how could Yi Jingtu not push him into it? Yi Jingtu glanced at Anmanian, who had been sent flying more than 100 meters away. He sneered and said, "Anmanian, my Yi family has no grudge against your An family, so we naturally won't touch you. However, I'm going to make a move on this impudent and disrespectful brat tonight. Who dares to stop me?" Yi Jingtu had made it very clear that he would not touch the An family for the time being, but now that he was going to make a move on this brat, he would kill anyone who dared to stop him, including the An family. Anmanian wanted to speak, but the old man had sealed his mute acupoint, so he could not move. The old man looked apologetic and said, "Manian, the bigger picture is more important. I don't know why you're protecting this brat, but how can an outsider compare to the entire family? You have to calm down." Anmanian stared blankly at the old man, not moving an inch. And Shinua and Ndingbang were also restrained by the old man, but they could still speak. And Shinua said anxiously, "Grandpa Mu, that person is the savior of our An family. The old man seemed to understand and nodded slightly. Little girl, I also guessed that this person has a deep relationship with your family. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so protective of him. I can understand how you feel, but you still have to act within your means. You can't help him. After saying that, the old man no longer looked at the three of them. He put his hands behind his back and slowly turned to look at Yi Jingtu and the Straw Hat Cultivator. At that moment, everyone's attention was on the Straw Hat Cultivator. It was as if they could already see the Straw Hat Cultivator being killed by Yi Jingtu. Everyone forgot about the competition. Zhou Rong stood alone in the field. She was not in a hurry and looked at the Straw Hat Cultivator curiously. Zhou Rong also did not understand what was wrong with this guy who was only in the early stage foundation establishment realm. How dare he say that the Jin Dan cultivators were blind? Wasn't he asking for a beating? On the other side, Old Gun, who was meditating, narrowed his eyes and closed them again. Bai Yi, on the other hand, opened her eyes and looked for a while longer. The Straw Hat Cultivator gave her a sense of déjà vu, but she could not remember where she had seen him before. Bai Yi did not remember this person. After Yi Jingtu finished speaking in an imposing manner, he looked at the Straw Hat Cultivator as if he was looking at a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Kid, if you destroy your own cultivation, kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times in front of Brother Dong, then go to the Dong clan and do 10 years of hard labor, then we Jin Dan cultivators will let you go. Yi Jingtu's voice was loud like a bell, and the sound waves contained a powerful Jin Dan aura. Many cultivators in the distance covered their ears and showed a pained expression. What if I don't? The Straw Hat Cultivator raised his head slightly, revealing half of his face, and asked calmly. Then you can go die. Yi Jingtu said with contempt. Is that so? How will I die? The Straw Hat Cultivator continued to ask with interest. When the surrounding cultivators heard this, they all looked at the Straw Hat Cultivator as if they were looking at a dead man. He doesn't know his place. This kid really wants to die. A cultivator could not help but say with his mouth agape. After getting into such a big trouble and being on the verge of death, he still dared to argue with the Jin Dan cultivators? If you don't die, who will? Yi Jingtu's murderous aura was instantly released, and his tone was as cold as ice. If you want to know so much, then I'll show you. As he spoke, Yi Jingtu's palm struck the Straw Hat Cultivator's chest quickly. But there was a crisp sound. Yi Jingtu's palm was easily pushed aside by the Straw Hat Cultivator. All the cultivators present were stunned, not knowing what was going on. Yi Jingtu's attack was a bit too light, many people muttered in their hearts. As the person involved, Yi Jingtu's expression changed. He knew very well how much strength he had used in that palm strike. Even if he had used up a lot of his strength, that palm strike was enough to kill an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator. It was actually pushed aside? Could it be that he had used too much strength and made a mistake in controlling his strength? Yi Jingtu thought of the reason and immediately gathered his strength for another palm strike. This palm strike contained a cultivation technique, and a cyclone was formed in the center of his palm. The second style of the Yi clan's suspended underworld palm, suspended breaking palm. But there was another crisp sound. Yi Jingtu's palm was pushed aside again. With your little strength, you dare to say that the might of the Jin Dan cannot be insulted? What a joke! The Straw Hat Cultivator shook his head and said. Yi Jingtu was a bit confused. Bang! Suddenly, there was a sound of a chi explosion. The aura of the Straw Hat Cultivator surged like the waves of the sea. Yi Jingtu's expression changed greatly. The aura continued to rise at an astonishing speed, from early-stage foundation establishment to peak foundation establishment in a short while, and there were no signs of it stopping. He had leaped into the realm of Jin Dan. Chapter 413. The Straw Hat Kid was a cultivator from Jin Dan? Everyone was shocked. Everyone stared at the straw hat cultivator, dumbfounded. Who would have thought that this guy would be a cultivator from Jindan? No, that's impossible, someone stammered. Those who knew the straw hat cultivator were even more incredulous. Su Mao is already a cultivator from Jindan. How is that possible? Did Su Mao have a fortuitous encounter? A fortuitous encounter? This guy has been with the Yin family for almost 10 years. At that time, he was already in the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. He hasn't made any breakthroughs in all these years, but his cultivation level has improved slightly, an insider said. After a short moment of dead silence, there was an uproar and a lot of discussion. The 12 Jindan cultivators were the most shocked. How could they have known that there was a cultivator from Jindan here? None of them had sensed this person's presence. Bai's eyes that had just closed suddenly opened. She looked at the straw hat cultivator with a thoughtful gaze, and then her cherry-red lips curled up. So it's you, Bai murmured. Soon, her beautiful face froze, and her heart was in turmoil. Not long ago, this guy was only in the mid-stage of the foundation establishment realm. How could he be a cultivator from Jindan in such a short time? Bai's delicate body stiffened, and she was dumbfounded. Old Gun also saw some clues. As a mid-stage Jindan cultivator, he was also shocked. The Yin family members were all dumbfounded. And Manian, who had been anxious just a moment ago, was now standing there in a daze. He suddenly realized that he was an idiot. Does Mr. Li need you to protect him? And Sinuo's mouth was wide open. There was only shock in her beautiful eyes, and her mind was blank. And Ding Bang, who usually didn't show his emotions, was also dumbfounded. A few months ago, he was drinking and chatting with Li Daochong at the Pure Gold Hotel. At that time, Li Daochong definitely wasn't a Jindan. Things always happened to this guy that couldn't be imagined. Jindan's prestige can't be insulted? What if I'm also a Jindan? The straw hat cultivator's voice slowly sounded, his tone carrying a strong sense of playfulness. Yi Jingtu had never imagined that the ant in front of him, who should have been easily squashed to death, was actually a Jindan cultivator. The hair on Yi Jingtu's back stood on end, and the killing intent on his body instantly disappeared. The condescending expression on his face also disappeared, leaving only astonishment and a trace of fear. Yi Jingtu had expended too much energy. No matter how strong this straw hat cultivator was at the Jindan stage, he was no longer someone he could deal with. However, the straw hat cultivator's words were like a sharp arrow that pierced through Yi Jingtu's arrogance. The superior feeling of being a high-level cultivator vanished like smoke in thin air. Naturally, there was no such thing as respect between cultivators of the same level. To use an inappropriate analogy, if an 80-year-old man said to another 80-year-old man, "Are you blind?" Can you say that he is disrespectful? Yi Jingtu's expression was spectacular, but he couldn't say a single word. In fact, he didn't dare to say anything. For the first time, Li Daochong completely raised his head. He raised his hand and took off his straw hat, revealing his entire face. To the cultivators of planet Scarlet Sun, this was a very unfamiliar face. However, when they saw this face, everyone's expression became even more shocked. Because he was too young. Even though Bai Yi had already guessed who it was, when Li Daochong's face was revealed, this Jindan female cultivator still pursed her lips, as if she was unwilling. A few months ago, this guy still had to call her senior. In such a short time, his cultivation was already on par with hers. What kind of monster was this? That Dong guy is blind. You're also blind. All of you are blind. Li Daochong looked at Yi Jingtu and said word by word. Yi Jingtu's face twitched. Didn't you say that Jindan's prestige can't be insulted? I just said that 3 of you are blind. Do you have a problem with that? Li Daochong asked in return. Kid, don't think that you can be arrogant just because you're a Jindan cultivator. Are you prepared to offend all 12 Jin Dan cultivators here? Dong Yuan said in a deep voice. It was inappropriate for him to say anything after being called out. So what? Li Daochong said indifferently. Kid, don't be arrogant. There are strong and weak Jin Dan cultivators. If this old man didn't fight just now, killing you would be as easy as killing a dog, Dong Yuan said coldly. Bang! With a muffled sound, Dong Yuan was sent flying. No one saw what happened clearly. They only felt a burst of energy shoot out in an instant, and then Dong Yuan was sent flying. Shiman Jin, who was beside Dong Yuan, didn't react at all. He only knew what had happened when Dong Yuan was sent flying. Pooh! 100 meters away, Dong Yuan spat out a mouthful of blood. His internal organs seemed to have been shattered, and a crack appeared on his Jin Dan. You! Dong Yuan sat on the ground and pointed at Li Daochong. He could only spit out one word. The blood in his body was churning, and he couldn't say anything. Blood kept flowing out of his mouth. Patriarch! The Dong family members and cultivators exclaimed in unison. They rushed to Dong Yuan and helped him up. The Dong family members glared at Li Daochong. You actually used underhanded means. Li Daochong looked as if nothing had happened. He only said, underhanded means? You clearly attacked openly. How can you call it underhanded because you don't have the ability to see it? Ridiculous. You. The Dong family patriarch, Dong Liming, was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. However, there was nothing he could do. The patriarch was seriously injured, and the other party was a Jin Dan cultivator. He didn't dare to say anything. Yi Jingtu felt a chill run down his spine. He stood 5 meters away from Li Daochong. He felt an incomparable sense of danger. He wanted to turn around and run, but he couldn't because of his face. There were so many people watching. If he, Yi Jingtu, the patriarch of the Yi family, ran away in fear, he would become the laughingstock of the cultivators of the Scarlet Sun planet in the future. Who are you? Yi Jingtu tried his best to hide his fear and asked. Isn't the Yi family one of the 4 great families of the Scarlet Sun planet? You don't even know who I am. Your information network is really bad. Li Daochong said disdainfully. The cultivators were a little confused when they heard this. Did this guy mean that he didn't appear out of nowhere? He was famous on the Scarlet Sun planet? At this moment, someone from the Yi family suddenly said, He's the person behind the third Master Yin. He appeared in the black market fighting ring a few months ago. People call him Mr. Li. Then, some of the people from the other families who didn't have high status recognized Li Daochong. Li Daochong spent most of his time on the Scarlet Sun planet. He didn't have much contact with cultivators. The only time he did was at Shuangyuan town. However, most of the cultivators at that time had died. Only Old Gun and Bai were still alive. The news had not spread. Therefore, those who knew Li Daochong were the people at the bottom. At most, the cultivators had only heard of him. Mr. Li. Yi Jingtu also remembered that he had heard of this person a few months ago. However, he didn't pay much attention to him at that time. A few people like this would appear every year, but they were just small characters. At most, they could act like tyrants among mortals. In the eyes of cultivators, they weren't worth paying attention to. In his 8 lifetimes, Yi Jingtu would never have thought that a golden core cultivator would go to the black market's fighting ring, a place that other cultivators would not take notice of. Now we should talk about the 10 million spirit stones. You said that you wanted the Yin family to compensate 10 million spirit stones? Li Daochong said with a smile. Mr. Li, since you're a Jin Dan cultivator, we're all of the same generation. There's no need to talk about disrespecting your elders. Let's drop this matter. Yi Jingtu didn't care about his reputation at this time. Although he was admitting defeat, what he said was the truth. It also gave him a way out. It was better than running away with his face down. At least he wouldn't embarrass himself. After speaking, Yi Jingtu turned to leave. However, before he could turn around, a faint voice sounded. Drop this matter? Did I agree? Yi Jingtu paused. He braced himself and put on a strong face. What do you want? Li Daochong's eyes were calm. He said indifferently, You provoked me in front of so many people. You wanted to kowtow, compensate me, and make me do hard labor? Jin Dan's prestige can't be humiliated. I agree. Since you were so disrespectful to me, then compensate me with 10 million spirit stones. After that, this matter will drop. You. Yi Jingtu was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He suppressed his anger and said in a low voice, Mr. Li, don't push your luck. Let's all take a step back and let this matter drop. It won't hurt anyone. When the cultivators heard Mr. Li's words, they were all shocked. Wasn't this guy trying to pick a fight? Old thing, I've already taken a step back. Don't test my patience. Li Daochong's faint smile disappeared. He said coldly, Good, good, good. Yi Jingtu said good 3 times in a row. His tone was filled with anger. He then said, You're going to shed all pretense of cordiality. Noisy. Li Daochong swung his hand and slapped Yi Jingtu. Slap. The slap landed heavily on Yi Jingtu's face. Yi Jingtu was sent flying. He spun in the air countless times and landed dozens of meters away. Half of his face was swollen like a pig's head. You're courting death. A few cultivators with high cultivation levels among the Yi family cultivators shouted. The Yi family's overall strength was above the Dong family. Although Yi Jingtu was the only true Jin Dan cultivator, due to the Black Tortoise bloodline, there were still a few cultivators at the peak of the foundation establishment stage who had the strength to challenge Jin Dan cultivators. Seeing their patriarch being slapped in public, how could they tolerate it? A few of them rushed into the sky and pounced on Li Daochong. They looked like they wanted to tear Li Daochong to pieces. Buzz. There was a tremor. Li Daochong disappeared from where he was and went up to meet the attack. Bang, bang, bang. Chapter 4:14. One strike. With just one strike, 3 cultivators at the peak of the foundation establishment stage were beaten half to death. How could an ordinary Jin Dan cultivator do that? The sudden appearance of a Jin Dan cultivator had already caused waves in the hearts of the 12 Jin Dan cultivators present. Now that they saw that he was not an ordinary Jin Dan cultivator, their hearts trembled. Yi Jingtu, will the Yi family compensate? Li Daochong floated in the air and asked loudly. His voice was like a tidal wave. Every word he said was accompanied by a wave of sound waves. The cultivators who were standing far away could not avoid the sound waves and were forced to retreat. Yi Jingtu spat out a mouthful of blood. The Jin Dan in his body had cracked open. If he was hit again, he might suffer from an unrecoverable injury. Because the Yi family members were the closest to him, they were all swaying left and right. After being hit by Li Daochong's sound waves, only a few of them could remain standing. You dare to touch the Yi family? Yi Jingtu held his breath. Why wouldn't I? Li Daochong's reply was even sharper than before. Puff. More than half of the Yi family cultivators spat out mouthfuls of blood. All of them suffered internal injuries. The 12 Jin Dan cultivators' eyes twitched. Just this move alone was enough to show that Mr. Li's spiritual energy was profound. Just the sound waves alone were enough to render so many cultivators defenseless. Yi Jingtu's face was pale and bloodless. He clutched his chest and could not say a word. Li Daochong shot a telekinetic attack at him. Yi Jingtu's mind buzzed. The feeling of impending death made him shiver. The higher the cultivation level of a cultivator, the more afraid they were of death. Yi Jingtu could not stand steadily. With a thud, he fell to his knees. He had a splitting headache and could not hold on any longer. Without caring about his reputation, he said, the Yi family will compensate. After spitting out these 3 words with difficulty, the pressure in Yi Jingtu's mind disappeared. I will give you 3 hours. If you do not see 10 million spirit stones within 3 hours, I will cripple the cultivation bases of all the cultivators from your Yi family, Li Daochong said coolly. After that, Li Daochong slowly landed on the battlefield. He glanced at the cultivators around him and said, "The Yin clan still has one more participant. I'll take it." And Manian couldn't believe his ears when he heard this. Everyone in the Yin family looked delighted. And Sinuo and Ndingbang looked at each other and smiled. The old man heaved a sigh of relief. Li Daochong was waiting for a few of the stronger Jin Dan cultivators to be exhausted. The remaining Jin Dan cultivators could be wiped out with a wave of his hand. Although Zhou Rong was strong, Li Daochong had seen the battle between her and Bai Yi, so there was nothing to worry about. "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting." Li Daochong bowed slightly after landing on the ground. Zhou Rong was stunned by his politeness. "It's fine. Mr. Li, you have reached the Jin Dan realm at such a young age. I admire you." Zhou Rong's eyes flickered as she nodded slightly. The two of them chatted back and forth, which was quite unique. They didn't look like they were about to fight at all. They were more like young men and women introducing themselves to each other for the first time. Many cultivators with good eyesight even saw a faint blush on Zhou Rong's face. In fact, it wasn't just Zhou Rong. The eyes of the surrounding female cultivators were also shining. To be able to reach the Jin Dan realm at such a young age, he was definitely tall, rich, and handsome among cultivators. Any female cultivator would be tempted by him and would want to take him for herself. Where else could one find such a dual-day partner? He was a rare breed. Most cultivators who reached the Jin Dan realm were at least 40 to 50 years old, accounting for 60% of them. The more powerful ones who reached the Jin Dan realm at around 30 years old were already quite impressive. This young man, who looked like he wasn't even 20 years old, was already a Jin Dan cultivator. In the entire Federation, he was as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. Even in the 3 great cultivation empires, there were very few of them. What woman wouldn't be tempted by such a young and promising man? If a mortal woman saw him, she would find that cultivators had a natural attraction to mortals. The stronger the cultivation, the stronger the attraction. Mortals already had a hard time resisting the spiritual energy of a foundation establishment cultivator, let alone a Jin Dan cultivator. However, no matter if it was a mortal woman or a mortal man, cultivators wouldn't take a liking to them. This was because mortals had impure energy in their bodies. If they came into close contact with them, they would absorb a portion of the cultivator's spiritual energy, hindering their cultivation. Thus, cultivators wouldn't choose mortals when looking for a partner. Cultivating demonic arts was another matter altogether. Fairy's spider lilies left a deep impression. "I've already wasted a lot of time. Fairy, please," Li Daochong immediately said. "Mr. Li, then I'll have to offend you." Zhou Rong didn't intend to be polite. After she finished speaking, the petals drifted away with the wind. In an instant, the space within a 10-meter radius was filled with petals. "Fairy, this move of yours is useless against me. Just use your ultimate move," Li Daochong reminded her. "How do you know it's useless if you don't try?" Zhou Rong clearly didn't believe Li Daochong's words. Li Daochong shrugged, revealing an expression that said, "Do whatever you want." The number of petals Zhou Rong used right now was more than double the number of petals she used against Bai Yi. Li Daochong's Tsang ink was riddled with injuries. Naturally, he couldn't use it. Otherwise, he would have been able to break the drifting flower formation with one slash. However, even without the Tsang ink, Li Daochong still had a way to break it. Although the Straw Hat Cultivator's Samurai was only a low-grade heaven-grade weapon and couldn't withstand more than 2 or 3 slashes from Li Daochong, it was enough to be used as a single-use weapon. Li Daochong stretched out his hand and the samurai sword flew into his hand. A serious expression appeared on Zhou Rong's delicate face. She couldn't see through this Mr. Li at all. She had no idea how strong he was. Zhou Rong's eyes focused. The spirit energy in her body suddenly shrank. Then, with a wave of her delicate hand, thousands of petals flew out. Li Daochong swung his saber. The fifth stage of the 9-split saber technique, star slashing slash. During the Jin Dan stage, Li Daochong condensed the Jin Dan. The spirit energy in his body was as boundless as a surging river. When he used a technique like the 9-split saber technique, he could transcend the ordinary category and take another step forward. Before the Jin Dan stage, when Li Daochong used the 9-split saber technique, he could only focus on one line and exert the power to the extreme. After the Jin Dan stage, the 9-split saber technique's level increased again. In addition to the splitting effect, Li Daochong's understanding of the saber technique increased by another level. With one slash, he could release and withdraw. When released, he could scatter flowers. When withdrawn, he could break mountains and rivers. Previously, the star slashing slash could only produce one star slashing slash. At this moment, the star slashing slash was still one slash, but it produced thousands of splendors. Each of the splendors hit a petal. Not one slash more, not one slash less. The thousands of petals were all cut down. Zhou Rong hurriedly retreated more than 10 steps. The qi and blood in her body were surging. She felt something sweet in her throat and almost spat out a mouthful of blood, but she forced herself to swallow it back. Li Daochong didn't move, but the samurai sword in his hand was broken into more than 10 pieces. There wasn't a trace of magic gold left, and it turned into ordinary iron. Li Daochong swung his hand and threw away the broken samurai sword. Seeing this scene, the cultivators watching from afar all sucked in a breath of cold air. What kind of saber technique was this? That slash carried thousands of splendors, like stars in the night sky. It cut down Zhou Rong's famous consummate skill, the scattered flower formation. Nothing was left. The terrifying part of this saber technique wasn't its power, but its accuracy and attack range. In other words, no matter how many there were, he could cut them all down with one slash. Its power was close to a divine power, but it wasn't a divine power at all. It was just a saber technique. Da-da-da, the petal darts fell to the frozen ground one after another, making a series of sounds. Zhou Rong's heart ached. She had spent more than 10 years collecting dozens of magic gold materials to refine these petal darts. Each petal was expensive, but now they were all gone. Even a Jin Dan cultivator like Zhou Rong couldn't bear such a loss. It would take a long time to gather so many more. Li Daochong shook his head and said, "Fairy, I told you not to use them, but you didn't listen." Zhou Rong's qi and blood hadn't completely calmed down, so she couldn't speak. She could only look at Li Daochong with a hint of anger in her eyes. This guy is really strong. Zhou Rong sighed and had to admit reality. Zhou Rong had fought countless battles over the years, against dark ghosts and cultivators, but she had never been unable to see through her opponent like today. Even when she faced that red ghost, Zhou Rong didn't feel this way. An inexplicable intuition slowly grew in Zhou Rong's heart. Not even the resurrection lily could deal with him. At this moment, miserable screams rang out from the loose cultivators in the distance. A massive black gate rose from the ground and blasted away a dozen or so cultivators. The black gate opened and a human-shaped minotaur monster walked out. It was over 6 meters tall and wielded a massive wolf-tooth club. The moment the minotaur appeared, it launched a frenzied assault on the cultivators in front of it. With a single swing of its club, several cultivators were smashed into meat paste. In just 2 or 3 swings of the club, more than half of the loose cultivators were wiped out. Only 4 Jin Dan cultivators managed to dodge. When Wang Qianxi saw the minotaur, he didn't hesitate in the slightest. He turned and charged into the sky. He was the first to flee. At a glance, Wang Qianxi recognized that the minotaur that walked out of the black door was a general-level ghost beast of the nether realm. Even a Jindan stage cultivator was no match for it. Its strength was comparable to a peak Jindan stage cultivator, and its physical defense could withstand several attacks from a nascent soul stage cultivator. This was one of the Hades's heavy ground tank. Wang Qianxi had been to 13 Specter before. The Minotaur was the nightmare of the Jindan cultivators on 13 Specter. Wang Qianxi reflexively retreated several li away. Just as Wang Qianxi breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that he had escaped disaster, a wave of dark fire rushed toward him. Wang Qianxi was shocked and did his best to block, but his moves were instantly annihilated. He was swallowed up by the dark fire and turned into black dust. Chapter 4:15. Wang Qianxi was not the only one who was burned to death by the Oxhead's attack. Chen Yuan, the faceless Taoist, was too exhausted from the previous battle and was unable to dodge. He was also buried in the sea of fire. Lu Jingtian, the enlightened Taoist, used all his strength to barely survive. One of his arms was burned to ashes. Among the 4 rogue cultivators, the only one who managed to dodge was Old Man Green Bamboo, Zhang Shou. 2 of the 4 rogue cultivators from Jindan died in an instant. The cultivators present were all terrified. How could a terrifying general-level ghost beast like the Oxhead appear on planet Crimson Sun? Quick, inform the cultivation army. Someone shouted. The appearance of a ghost beast of this level was enough to turn a 4th-class cultivation planet like planet Crimson Sun into a dead planet. Many cultivators were shocked. Many of them started to use their wristwatches to contact the local cultivation army on planet Crimson Sunday. Just as the cultivators were flustered, the wristwatches in their hands flashed with sparks and exploded. Everyone's spirit magnetic wristwatches were destroyed. A few cultivators were very smart. When they saw that their spirit magnetic wristwatches were damaged, they immediately took out high-level 1,000-mile voice transmission talismans and released them. However, the talismans did not turn into spirit magnetic sound wave. Instead, they were burned to ashes the moment they left their hand. Only then did the cultivators realize that something was wrong. After the Oxhead appeared, a magnetic barrier rose within a radius of dozens of kilometers, isolating this place from the outside world. Many cultivators began to flee. Even the Jindan cultivators could not withstand the Oxhead's attack, let alone them. However, the cultivators did not run far before they returned. A few kilometers away, the black fog lingered. Once they entered, they would be devoured by the death aura and turned into dried corpses. However, the black fog that suddenly appeared did not spread. It only enveloped this area completely. At this moment, Yi Jingtu and Dong Yuan's faces were filled with fear. "Brother Yi, what's with the black fog?" Dong Yuan asked through telekinesis. However, there was a hint of panic in his voice. Yi Jingtu's face was pale. He was badly injured by Li Daochong's telekinesis attack. He looked at the black fog in the distance with a confused expression. "Brother Dong, something's wrong. This Oxhead has already condensed a death beast core. It's a complete body. We can't control it." Yi Jingtu's voice changed. This. Dong Yuan was so scared that he could not speak. This Oxhead was released by Yi Jingtu and Dong Yuan. Jin and a dozen Jindan cultivators gathered to surround this young Oxhead. 3 Jindan cultivators. And was killed. 2 Suppressed. And after they had killed 3 of them and killed 4 seriously injured. And heavily injured killed 2 of the 2 of. 2 killed they. Of. Edition. The Lingxi Pagoda was a type of spatial Dharma treasure. There was a Na-Yu space inside, which was equivalent to an independent small universe. It was about the size of a city. This S2S Without a nascent soul realm cultivator, it was impossible to kill a general-level ghost beast like the Oxhead. With the offensive attack of a Jindan realm cultivator, even if they bombarded it day and night and stabbed it with sabers and swords for a few days and nights, they still could not kill it. The only way to kill it was to seal it in a space. After sealing the Oxhead, the next step was to bring it to the demon-subduing city guarded by the cultivation army on 13 Specter to exchange for items. At that time, Yi Jing-tu and the others did the same. A single Oxhead was worth a lot. It was enough for more than a dozen people to get something they wanted. However, on the way back, they encountered a ghost beast tide. A group of Jindan cultivators fought desperately. In the end, only Yi Jing-tu and Dong Yuan survived. The two of them plundered all the items on the bodies of the fallen Jindan cultivators. Among them, there was a very special Dharma treasure. It was the tortoise breath box. This Dharma treasure had a very simple use. It was to conceal all auras. Anything placed inside would disappear as if it had disappeared. This turtle breath box was a little special. There was a spatial spirit array on it that could perform spatial jump. With this thing, Yi Jing-tu became greedy and wanted to bring the Oxhead out of 13 Specter. When Dong Yuan heard Yi Jing-tu's idea, he was shocked. Dong Yuan did not agree at first. It was too risky. If they were found out, it would be a serious crime in the Federation. However, when Yi Jing-tu mentioned the Black Prison, Dong Yuan was also tempted. If he handed the Oxhead to the cultivation army on 13 Specter, he could exchange it for a lot of tempting items. However, if he took it to the Black Prison to auction, he could get more than 3 times the exchange value. The black market had always been the craziest and most profitable. In the end, Dong Yuan agreed to take the risk and put the Lingxi Pagoda into the turtle breath box. Then, the two of them directly teleported the turtle breath box out of 13 Specter and spent 300,000 spirit stones to send it to a dead planet in the 8-ring starfield. It was absolutely impossible to bring it with them. There was the Federation's most powerful detection spirit array in Demon Subduing City. Any netherworld item could only enter and not come out. If someone secretly brought a netherworld item out of Demon Subduing City, the spirit array would automatically lock onto them and trap them in place. Then, patrolling cultivators would take them away. The netherworld items on 13 Specter were all very high level. Once they were brought into the 4-ring starfield of the Federation, it would be a disaster. High-level netherworld items could absorb a large amount of soul power and vitality in a very short period of time, allowing themselves to evolve into an even more terrifying existence. However, this time, Yi Jing-tu and Dong Yuan's risk was successful. The two of them secretly brought the Oxhead out of 13 Specter. Then, they found the turtle breath box with a mark on the dead planet and brought it to planet Crimson Sunday. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 years had passed. During this time, Dong Yuan had looked for Yi Jing-tu and wanted to go to the Black Prison to sell the Oxhead. However, Yi Jing-tu was greedy. He felt that the value of a young Oxhead was far from enough. Only an adult Oxhead could be sold for a high price. Ever since Yi Jing-tu returned, he had been feeding the Oxhead. What did he use to feed it? Was there a need to ask? Of course, it was a human soul. On a bustling 4th-class cultivation planet, finding homeless people and lonely people was as easy as flipping one's hand. In the past 10 years, at least tens of thousands of people on planet Crimson Sun had disappeared, and it was related to Yi Jing-tu. Tens of thousands of people seemed to be a large number, but to a cultivation planet with more than 3 billion people, it was just a drop in the ocean. Moreover, many of these people were vagrants without families, so no one would pay attention to them. Every once in a while, Yi Jing-tu would go to some of the big cities on planet Crimson Sun to capture people and throw them into the Lingxi Tower. However, feeding the Oxhead was one thing. Yi Jing-tu could not find out the specific situation of the Oxhead unless he released it. Otherwise, with his telekinesis, He could not penetrate space and investigate the situation in the Na-universe space. He could only make a rough judgment. Yi Jingtu had stopped feeding the oxhead 3 years ago. He estimated that the oxhead had almost reached adulthood. However, Yi Jingtu did not know what abilities an adult oxhead had. General-level ghost beasts already had the ability to use dark art. This was the same principle that Jin Dan cultivators had the ability to use divine abilities. Yi Jingtu was only an early-stage Jin Dan cultivator. He had only been to the 13 Specter once. At that time, he had gathered more than 10 Jin Dan cultivators, but they had only been circling the outermost area of the hunting ground. Therefore, Yi Jingtu's understanding of the oxhead was limited to other sources. He had never seen it with his own eyes. Now that he had released the oxhead, Yi Jingtu realized that he had been completely wrong. In the past 3 years, he and Dong Yuan had secretly collected many secret techniques to control ghost beasts. Some of them could control general-level ghost beasts. However, Yi Jingtu had neglected his own cultivation level. Even if he and Dong Yuan had mastered the secret techniques, they would not be able to control ghost beasts like the oxhead. Their telekinesis was not enough to interfere with the oxhead's dark soul. Yi Jingtu's back was drenched in cold sweat. The oxhead was running wildly in the direction of the 3 great family clans. The oxhead's eyes, which were the size of copper gongs, were filled with red light. It had been sealed for more than 10 years. Once the suppressed anger was released, it would be extremely terrifying. The oxhead's eyes were fixed on Yi Jingtu and Dong Yuan. Even if the 2 of them were reduced to ashes, it would never forget the 2 of them who had sealed it away. Yi Jingtu suddenly understood the meaning of these words. The arrival of death and the heavy injuries caused him to stand motionless on the spot like a statue. Smack! The oxhead stomped down with its hooves, and Yi Jingtu turned into a pile of meat paste. Patriarch! The Yi family members cried out. They could not believe what they had just seen. Although Dong Yuan was afraid, his injuries were much better than Yi Jingtu's. At this moment, he had already flown out and fled to where the family members were. Mr. Li, shouldn't we put aside the fight between us for a while? If we don't get rid of this beast, everyone here will die under its iron hooves. Do you want to join forces? Zhou Rong suddenly asked. Chapter 4:16. Li Daochong naturally knew of Oxhead's illustrious reputation as a demonic beast of the Hades. Oxhead and Horseface had an extremely high reputation among the large group of mortals. There was almost no one who didn't know of them. When grandpas and grandmas scared children, they would often tell them to be obedient and not be naughty. Otherwise, Oxhead and Horseface would spank their little buttocks and take the naughty children away. The old people's playful words to scare children revealed the reverence and fear of Oxhead and Horseface among the mortals. 1,000 years ago, when the Hades descended, the highest level of demonic beasts that mortals could see were Oxhead and Horseface. When Li Daochong had just woken up, he had already read through all the ancient records in the library of Profound Firmament University. At that time, Li Daochong didn't have the ability to remember everything he saw. However, with the assistance of the hot-blooded level-up device, he was able to remember most of the things he saw. Some records regarding Oxhead surfaced in his mind at this time. Oxhead was originally a member of the Demon Ox clan, belonging to the nobility of the demonic beasts. The demonic beasts were unable to resist the invasion of the Hades, and were almost exterminated. The demonic beasts still had their bestial nature, making them easier to control than the humans. Although the Demon Ox clan was a fighting clan among the demonic beasts, they were easily controlled because of their tyrannical nature, quick to anger, and reckless nature. The Hades only needed to use the fog of death to completely exterminate the Demon Ox clan. All the Demon Ox clan's demon cores turned into death-seeking pills, becoming members of the Hades. This was the origin of Oxhead. After Oxhead became a demonic beast, his strength was actually a level higher than before, reaching the peak of Jindan and even half a step into Yuanying's level. He could be considered the backbone of the Hades. In reality, the consciousness of the demon Ox clan was not completely dissolved by the fog of death. They were one of the few demonic beasts that still had their consciousness, but were still willing to become demonic beasts. The demonic beasts cultivated slowly. How could they be so relaxed and happy after becoming demonic beasts? They only needed to devour the vitality of souls to rapidly increase their cultivation. Moreover, when it devoured the life force of the soul, it would produce an extremely great sense of pleasure. It was a kind of comfort that came from the depths of the soul. It was like eating immortal grass, causing one to be fascinated and unable to stop even if they wanted to. After Oxhead stomped Yi Jingtu to death with one hoof, he smashed more than half of the Yi clan members to death with a few blows. Under the pressure of the dense death chi, these cultivators, who were not Oxhead's match to begin with, could not fight back at all. Oxhead crushed everything in front of him like he was killing a chicken. Following which, Oxhead turned around and raised his iron hoof. Thump, thump, thump. With heavy footsteps, he charged towards Dong Yuan at an astonishing speed. At this moment, Dong Yuan was already standing among the infamily. Anmonian's expression darkened. Dong Yuan, what's the meaning of this? Dong Yuan gritted his teeth shamelessly and said, Anmonian, you're going to die either way. Isn't the infamily going to fight? Anmonian scoffed. Even if I do, I won't be your shield. As soon as he finished speaking, the old man surnamed Mu, who had always been standing beside Anmonian, suddenly waved his hand. A ray of light suddenly appeared and enveloped everyone in the infamily, except for Dong Yuan. In the blink of an eye, everyone disappeared, leaving only Dong Yuan standing alone in his original spot. Teleport with so many people at once? Dong Yuan was dumbfounded. Even if he was in peak condition, he would not be able to do it. Without a late-stage Jindan cultivation, he would not be able to use this kind of divine power. The infamily members did not leave the area surrounded by the black fog. They merely shifted their positions and appeared in another location several kilometers away. Old Man Mu's face was pale. That move just now had taken a lot out of him. However, it completely ruined Dong Yuan's wishful thinking of using the infamily members to block Oxhead's attack. When Dong Yuan saw where the infamily members appeared, he still wanted to leap over. However, he had just taken flight when a furry beast reached out and grabbed him. Dong Yuan screamed in pain. His bones had already been crushed. Oxhead opened his mouth and bit off Dong Yuan's head. He then split the rest of his body into 3 bites and swallowed it. The spiritual body, Jindan, and powerful soul of a Jindan cultivator were great nourishment for Oxhead. After eating Dong Yuan, the death aura on Oxhead's body became denser. A dark red underworld fire burned in its eyes. Different types of underworld fire had different colors. Dark red and black were the most common colors of underworld fire. After Oxhead absorbed Dong Yuan's life force, it raised its head to the sky. Its body trembled slightly, revealing an expression of enjoyment. He looked exactly like a drug addict when he was taking drugs. The effect lasted for more than 10 seconds. During the entire process, Oxhead enjoyed the most direct stimulation in the depths of its dead soul. It was not worried at all whether the ants around it would attack it or not, nor was it worried that they would escape. After Oxhead finished absorbing the life force in its body, it slowly lowered its head and looked at the group of cultivators in the distance. Tonight was going to be a grand banquet. Oxhead let out a low roar of excitement from the depths of its throat. Devouring so many cultivators was enough for it to advance into an Oxhead shaman. Oxhead shamans were no longer ghost beasts, but underworld beasts. This was a creature of the Hades that was far above ghost beasts. After Li Daochong and Zhou Rong came to an agreement, they did not immediately take action. Instead, they stood motionless in their original position and watched as Oxhead wiped out all the cultivators with stronger cultivation from the three great clans. Oxhead cleaned up quite thoroughly. No matter if it was cultivators, or mortal servants from the three great clans, as long as they could reach them, they were all eaten clean. Among them, there were 5 Jin Dan cultivators. The remaining survivors were all small qi condensation cultivators? Criminals? Jiuhui Xing Sida Fangyi? Cha. This feast was enough to make Oxhead's power of dead souls increase by leaps and bounds. However, for some reason, Oxhead's death aura did not increase by much. Apart from Li Daochong, no one else knew why. In fact, most people did not even realize this problem. Only the remaining Jin Dan cultivators revealed puzzlement in their eyes. Logically speaking, the 5 Jin Dan cultivators being swallowed by Oxhead should be enough to make this beast's death aura increase by an entire level. Even if it could not advance, it would definitely make its strength increase greatly. However, after the Oxhead ate everyone from the three great clans, the increase in its death aura was very limited. This was somewhat strange. Zhou Rong frowned slightly, somewhat unable to understand. Suddenly, she sensed an obscure but extremely condensed force of will. Then, Zhou Rong's brows relaxed and she revealed an expression of surprise. She turned to look at Li Daochong beside her and asked, "Mr. Li, were you the one who killed those Jin Dan cultivators first?" Li Daochong stared unblinkingly at the Oxhead in front of him. After hearing Zhou Rong's question, he nodded slightly and replied without any intention of hiding anything, "If I did not kill the Jin Dan cultivators first and destroy their souls, causing the spirit qi of Jin Dan to quickly overflow and become deficient, this Oxhead would not be so powerful after swallowing so many Jin Dan cultivators. Fairy would not want to face an Oxhead that you can't defeat, right?" After hearing Li Daochong's words, Zhou Rong felt a chill run down her spine for no reason, and her hair stood on end. This Mr. Li's thoughts were frighteningly meticulous. Just as everyone was scared silly by the Oxhead and their minds were in a mess, he had actually thought of killing those Jin Dan cultivators before the Oxhead did. After all, the Oxhead had only swallowed dead people. Although the cultivators who had just died still had a large amount of life force, compared to those who were still alive, the difference was like heaven and earth. Furthermore, Li Daochong's method of killing these Jin Dan cultivators was a telekinesis attack. He had directly destroyed their souls and instantly left their bodies with only skin left. Meticulous thoughts and terrifying spiritual force. Zhou Rong suddenly realized that she might have been too close to this Mr. Li. After reaching an agreement to join forces, Zhou Rong let down her guard and walked to Li Daochong's side. Only then did she realize how brainless and ignorant her actions were. He had killed 5 early-stage Jin Dan cultivators from the 3 great clans with his spiritual force alone. The strength of this fellow's spiritual force had already surpassed that of a late-stage Jin Dan cultivator. The 3 great clans were quickly cleaned up. The Oxhead was clearly not satisfied and turned his attention to the family. The 3 great clans that had been fighting over the Frost Soul Origin Crystal had almost been completely wiped out. The itinerant cultivators had suffered heavy losses and were only left with half of their original cultivators. The family was the best preserved. After resting for a while, Old Gun and Bai Yi had recovered some strength. At this moment, the 2 of them stood up and were in a state of alert. The Oxhead turned his face to look at the family and let out a terrifying roar. He stepped on his iron hooves and charged forward, waving the huge mace in his hand. The family members were shocked. This ghost beast was too strong and could not be defeated. Just when the family members thought that they were going to be eaten by the Oxhead tonight, a green light flashed. A huge fist formed by Spiritual Highland hit the Oxhead's cheek hard. Bang! The oxhead's huge body flew sideways as if it had been hit by a huge boulder. It slid more than 10 meters in the air and fell heavily to the ground. The moment the oxhead appeared, it was immune to all the attacks of the cultivators who attacked it. The impression it left on everyone was that it was invincible. Therefore, when the oxhead was sent flying, everyone was stunned and stood there in a daze. They could not believe what they had seen was true. Li Daocheng's punch was just a small test of his skills. The power of the fist of rupturing had indeed increased a lot. After Li Daocheng landed, the family members looked at him as if they were looking at a statue. Their eyes were full of awe. Even the siblings, Ding Anding and Anshino, who had been friends with Li Daocheng, could not help but look up to him. The only thought in their minds was that they were not from the same world. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.